Good evening and welcome to this regular meeting of the Planning Board, the City of Birmingham, for Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. If we could please call the roll.
Scott Klein,
Present.
Robin Boyle,
Here.
Stuart Jeffers,
Here.
Barcosa,
Here.
Daniel Sher,
Here.
Brian Williams,
Here.
Janelle Wilkle-Boyce,
Here.
Jason Emmerman,
Here.
Nazim Rahman.
Here.
Okay, that's it.
Excellent. We are court. We've got two sets of minutes to approve today, Board. Let's start with review and approval of the minutes of the meeting on December 8th. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, I have a comment on page 2 of the minutes, under the, I guess, paragraph that starts, Mr. Williams commented that. The second bullet point, after the word map on line 2, I did make reference to this in my comments, and I would like it inserted, and that is to add the language after the word map and before the semicolon, add the phrase, and this area was previously rejected for rezoning by the city commission. I did make that comment. It didn't get in the minutes. And I'll give the
Thank you.
written.
Okay. Any other comments on the minutes of December 8th? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve as amended?
I'll move it.
Motion
As
to
amended.
approve as amended from Mr. Williams. Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Boyce. Any conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstention? Excellent. Let's move forward. Review and approval of the minutes of our meeting on December 16th, 2021, if my math is correct. Any comments or corrections? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve?
Move the approval of the minutes of December 16th, 2021 as presented.
Motion, Mr. Sher. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Boyle. Any conversation? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Aye.
One abstention, Ms. Boyce. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody who is watching here in this beautiful City Hall as well as at home, to our first meeting of 2022, as unbelievable as that could be. Tonight, we're going to be talking about two study session items. Number one, the Birmingham Master Plan, 2040 Plan, Chapter 3, about retaining neighborhood quality. And then later on, we'll be talking about outdoor dining. Our comprehensive study continues. Will be an opportunity for the public to comment at both of these items. At the appropriate time, I will indicate that it is time for public comment. If you are here, please come forward and there's only one microphone, so we'll come to this microphone and state your name and residence and then provide your input. If you are at home and watching on Zoom, use the raise your hand function in the center of your command console. I have a list of the participants, and if you hear your name called, please do the same from home. With that, Nick, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
No changes. Fantastic. So let's get moving right into it. Study session number one, the Birmingham Plan 2040, Chapter 3, retaining neighborhood quality. I see Mr. Lambert is dialed in. Happy New Year, sir. Welcome. And Nick, did you have something to do before I throw it to Matt?
No, just I don't have anything new to add necessarily.
Wonderful. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Happy New Year. Let me just pull this up quick and get right to it. Hopefully this is fairly quick and easy. These chapters are relatively short here on in. So today we continue with Chapter 3, Retain Neighborhood Quality. As we noted in the first presentation, this is short. Things are generally good in Birmingham. In this chapter, we look at a few broad issues that pertain to the quality and function of neighborhoods. Since the city was generally built using a walkable pattern of streets and blocks with pretty frequent parks, we're mainly focused on maintaining that overall. Just a reminder, in this list of general direction, the items associated with Chapter 3 are addressed. Feedback on mixed-use districts, which were here, aren't specifically applicable. However, I'll note that we've clarified and identified through this process that mixed-use districts do include residents today, and we hope they will include more in the future. And so they act as special kinds of neighborhoods that do require amenities like parks, safe streets, full tree canopies, and access to services. But in general, we don't have items from the first round listed here. But of course, we do on this last section of feedback on neighborhoods. Here on the items that are addressed in Chapter 3, most of these have been fully addressed, with the exception of detailing additional potential design controls that could be used to control housing quality. You know, in general, we recommend that, you know, this sort of thing be studied in greater detail as part of the zoning code update recommendations that focus on aligning standards with the established patterns of housing in each area. That's the only one that we said, you know, actually we didn't include that, so we're happy to talk about that. But under the section, this chapter, the first section here looks at parks. We discussed this really in the charrette more heavily, and some of this material actually wasn't in the first draft, so some of this is a little bit new because it was pointed out that we needed to pull it in from the charrette material. So as we look specifically at neighborhoods, it's clear that access to parks and recreation is critical for neighborhood quality. During the charrette, we had analyzed parks and how they're programmed and how their service areas affect what should be in a given park. So here we categorize parks by that function. There's some that are only for small areas, some that are for larger areas, some that are particularly special parks like the Rouge, and then generally aligning the amenities that should be included based upon the type of park and its ability to accommodate certain programming. You know, for example, are there paved walkways and benches? You know, that's a standard amenity in almost all parks, though, you know, one or two of the well sites don't really provide an opportunity for that. You know, so a question here is, how does this overlap with the 2018 Parks Plan? That particular plan was very focused and has a relatively short time horizon, and that looked at how to improve parks individually. Here, we're suggesting to look at parks from a different perspective and over a much longer time horizon. So you'll see in the recommendations, really the first three statements are about providing open spaces where it's clearly needed. You know, some options to try to get additional open space near Torrey in the future. And the last one is really to evaluate the programming of neighborhood parks based on how they service a small area, a whole planning district, or the community overall. And, you know, some of the things that we talked about in the first review when we touched on the whole park cafe concept, this is also listed in here in some of the instances where that may be recommended really in the specialty parks at the bottom. So this section is really pointing out the role that parks play in neighborhood quality and to look at some amenities that may be missing in certain parks as they function with the neighborhoods. So there's also one more thing to point out. The third item about parks where they're not currently existing, that third item was really about, you know, what is the formal relationship with school districts for community use of spaces? You know, it happens today. Is that formalized in such a way that there can be a means of adding amenities to some of those spaces that are multiple use between the district and the neighborhood? The next section is about streets. Initially, we were asked to evaluate the current residential street standards, and that evaluation appeared in the first draft. In this draft, after the feedback, we took that evaluation, sort of reversed the approach to consider how streets are assets to neighborhoods. And generally, the narrow tree-lined streets of Birmingham are considered, you know, the considerable assets to the community in the end because they're designed for cars and pedestrians equally, and that means they remain relatively safe and comfortable for those users as well as cyclists. Here, we mainly find that the residential street standards are good, but they could be more specific concerning the size and configuration of certain things like the width of sidewalks or planting strips, which actually change in different parts of the city, so there may be some more specificity added there. From the first charrette meetings, however, we also heard of many segments of missing sidewalks, which we've observed in the city, and those should be remedied. That's in the recommendations. And while car speeds are only somewhat influenced by the posted speed limit, in the first round, we recommended that you look into the 20 is plenty trend to reduce residential speeds to 20 miles an hour. There was a suggestion that couldn't happen. We checked the state statutes, and it looks like it can. We've run into this a lot across the country as well, but in general, reducing speeds to 20 in the neighborhoods will still influence most drivers. And lastly, in this section, we feel really that bike accommodations on Lincoln need to be further considered. We've been on the fence about this from the beginning. On-street parking is really important. It helps Lincoln, but undoubtedly it's a natural place to bike. And we all know that this has had some tragic consequences. And while we have a fix for, the traffic issues at Lincoln and Adams, overall the street is still well used as a bike route, and there should be some considerations for how bikes can be better accommodated on Lincoln. So that's the section on streets. The last time we also talked a little bit about the unimproved streets, and Janelle pointed out that at that point in time, basically between the first draft and our review, the ad hoc unimproved streets committee had completed their report. So for this round, we reviewed the report. It's actually quite good. And here we point to the need to adopt the related policy recommendations, to do a more complete survey of current conditions, to provide a clear budget to remedy conditions, and to ensure that improvements happen in all neighborhoods, and particularly where there are stormwater issues within neighborhoods, and not just sort of all the improvements going to one area or another area. So next is the street tree canopy, and while most of the homes in the city are charming, the street tree canopy really impacts neighborhood quality. Interestingly, when I was living in Coral Gables, Florida some years ago, a hurricane wiped out the street trees in a huge portion of the city one year, and without them, the place just really looked like anywhere else in Miami. And so tree canopy really has a serious impact on the quality of neighborhoods. So here, these recommendations look to further survey some existing conditions, determining where there's missing trees, diseased trees. There's also conditions where routes are constrained. This is, of course, more in the urban areas like on Merrill, but it's still an issue for tree health and canopy health. And to look at prioritizing the replacement of trees to fill gaps and to improve areas where tree health is diminished. As we heard from residents, there's also the point that healthy trees should be protected during construction, and that standards and policies are needed to ensure species diversity and reduce tree removal. And then finally, that two areas with the least trees, the Triangle and the Rail Districts, do need streetscape improvements as they evolve to become neighborhoods. The next section is a section on parking requirements, the inconsistencies of parking across the city. As we discussed in the first draft review, here we recommend that the new citywide standards be established along with a consistent residential permit program. The details of this would be further studied and specified by committee, similar to the ad hoc unimproved street committee. And again, a quick section, the last portion, but perhaps most important for residents, is that high quality housing character be retained. Some of the high priority items here are about enforcement around many of the stories that we've heard of construction impacts that may be addressed by more frequent inspection. As we addressed in the last chapter, the zoning code does need an overhaul, and in general, we believe that the standards for the residential districts could be more closely aligned with existing homes through that process of zoning code analysis and adjustment. And along with this, we think that neighborhood lighting, homes and streets should also be considered. And as we've discussed, incentives for renovations would require further study as well, but still worthwhile to see if there's some means of encouraging renovations and additions rather than only reconstruction. And lastly, in here, in addition from last time, is looking at historic districts and the ability to establish historic districts and landmarks in a proactive fashion rather than through a reactive process as happens today. So that was my very quick overview. Hopefully not too quick. But again, the section is relatively short and sweet and to the point.
Thanks, Matt. Let's start with the board. Anybody have any questions for Matt? I don't want to get us kicked off. Janelle, I see you nodding. Want to go?
I have a couple.
Ms. Boyce.
I was just trying to find the page here, though. And maybe, Matt, you had that kind of chart up with the 1 through 25 parks. Yeah, there it is. That's the same one. That's not current conditions, that's recommendations, right?
Yeah. So the check marks we're looking at the parks by type and suggesting that you should have these types of amenities in these types of parks with some modification for the specific conditions of those parks.
My question is then, further down in the packet, the recommendation that community parks should have cafes and/or restrooms. It's in the body of the text here. Community parks should provide the amenities of neighborhood parks and include more significant offerings, cafes, restrooms, and other special amenities. But that sentence, which I agree with, doesn't match up with the community parks section in that chart that you provided.
Good catch.
So I just,
Which is it?
yeah, which is it?
Good catch.
I just wanted to point it out because I agree with the text and I think it's a good idea, but it's not in there. So should I go through all my questions or do you want to do parks first? And how do you want to do it?
No,
I have a
we
question
can go
about,
through all of yours, but I don't know if Matt has an answer for that. If,
could just be an oversight.
Matt, do you know which one it is supposed to be?
Yeah. The text. I think Janelle's thanks for being on top of that.
That's okay.
Okay. Please continue.
A few statements, I guess. I was happy to see sidewalks pointed out in here again. It has been consistently throughout. I feel pretty strongly that we should at least finish up what is missing. And tasking multimodal with it, I think, is a great idea. I also wanted to ask about, you go on to say that in the housing section, that we might look to offer some sort of incentives to maintain some of the existing houses rather than them become tear downs. So my question to you is, in your experience, what sort of incentives have you seen offered in other communities to achieve this?
That's normally related to either relaxing of some standards, which could be a concern, like lot coverage in some cases. In many instances, you want to see some additions to homes. Normally, those older homes have fewer closets. You want to find ground floor masters and those sorts of things. And then additionally, depending upon the place, there may be incentives that are process incentives, like getting ahead of other applications for those sorts of changes, or reduced or waived review application fees. Those are the typical sorts of incentives that we've seen. We haven't done, say, an exhaustive look at them.
I just have one follow-up to that.
Please.
I think you mentioned that before in a meeting, and they sound like good ideas, but the first one, which seems most likely the sort of incentive that people would be most excited about, is difficult to achieve in most of the neighborhoods in the city. We already have really generous lot coverage, I would say, and we have really small lots and a good part of the city, 40-foot wide, 50-foot wide lots. So if we don't have that to offer, which I don't believe we probably do, then beyond moving up in the process of the application, do you have anything else you can suggest to us other than lot coverage that you've come across?
Like I said, we have, not that we've come across, we haven't done an exhaustive search on it though,
Okay,
but,
okay. All right, thanks. That's all I have for now.
Go, Mr. Williams, and we'll just work our way around.
Yeah, just sort of following up on the comment that Janelle made about sidewalks, and that is simply to make sure that in connection with an expansion of the sidewalks in the areas where they don't exist, in many cases, that's going to significantly adversely affect the tree canopy, because in most of these areas where the sidewalks are going to be located are quite mature trees on literally every lot that would be affected. So it's not simply a question of putting in sidewalks. There's simply going to have to be a provision for trees other than saplings to be put in. So it's a complicated issue. It isn't just putting in sidewalks. It's simply the combination of sidewalks and retaining the street canopy in the areas where we're going.
Sure.
I probably have about a half a dozen things I can go through quickly here. So generally, I know you haven't changed the document in many months, but as you continue to edit this thing, I think you have to call out there's lots and lots of words in there that have little meaning or aren't necessary, and a lot of work to sort of get through. But if I go to page 58, just some comments. So you talk about the Torrey neighborhood, and Torrey's almost split into two neighborhoods, and I agree with you. Where is Torrey's Pembroke or Poppleton Park? And so you suggest, which I think is a good idea, as Adams Square someday might come up for development, maybe there's an opportunity there, the post office possibly. The Triangle District Worth Park, I think, is never, I hope it happens, and in previous conversations, we've talked about maybe that becomes more of it's a half acre, it's nothing, that it becomes more of an urban park. This is not a place I'm going to go, play Frisbee with my kid or something, but I'm curious, you didn't mention, as long as we're targeting property we don't necessarily own, our Shepherd Lutheran School, so is there some partnership that might occur there? Eaton Academy, Kenning Park, actually, I walk back there sometimes, and it seems like it has a lot of unprogrammed space, and I wonder if there's some shifting of tennis courts and whatever that might make for the kinds of space that we're looking at. So I guess you just speak a lot about Worth Park and Worth Park. What we own is very small. We have control, I think, of what is the east side of Walgreens, but beyond that, it's nothing. So I would just strike that. I don't see that as serving the Torrey community. If I go to page, bear with me here, page 62, you make a blanket statement, Birmingham streets are exceptionally beautiful and pleasant. I would say generally, I think there are a lot of people here, and it became quite political last time, that some of these streets are not. So generally speaking, I agree with you, but to make a blanket statement to somebody who doesn't know this community, they think everything's perfect there. Same thing, you talk about it retains a wonderful tree canopy. In some areas, yes, in some areas, no. Again, it's sort of a blanket statement there that I think needs to be a little better defined. You comment about, today there are calls for wider streets. I don't know that I've ever heard that, in this community, other than maybe in a couple of different areas or something. So this is not the kind of town where people are saying, take 2 lanes and make it 3 or 4 and make it 5. So I don't agree with that statement. Sidewalks, we talked about that. I agree, let's create somebody, a committee, or we can all volunteer. We know where a lot of them are. And it's just a little bit of concrete to make those connections, and it does enhance us being a walkable community. On page 63, this came up before. I don't know the legalities of this. I would love, reduce residential posted speed limits to 20 miles per hour. I don't know if you can do that or not do that. I think Janice spoke a little bit about that in the past, but I think that's great if you can do that, because we know 20 means people drive 30. And then if I go to page 65, you talk about master plan actions. I think your item number 5 can move up to being number 1, because I think it covers a lot of this stuff. Convene a committee to establish street or tree policies, because if we have one, I don't know what it is, and I've seen gaps and other sorts of things, so, that could help to at least put that on the front burner and have people focus on that. And then if I go to probably the hardest thing, page 68, this is about retaining housing character. So, again, you make statements in here that I just, sometimes they're true and sometimes they're not true. So a comment that developers, their houses are designed to stand out and be noticed. I don't know that, there's a lot of bad stuff that stands out and is noticed, but I'm not sure that that is part of their goal. It's a byproduct of the bad architecture they're doing, but again, sort of an odd statement in my opinion. You talk about additions to existing homes should be encouraged as a way to, I've seen beautiful, and I've studied this for years, I've seen beautiful additions to existing homes. I've seen terrible additions to existing homes. I've seen terrible new construction, and I've seen beautiful new construction that I think everybody would be proud of and sort of believe that it fits our community. So I'm working on the design of a house now in a different area, and it's in a neighborhood that's got 30 pages of deed restrictions that mandates, materials and floor elevations and offsets, and it's very descriptive. Would I love that and love to be the author of that? Sure, but I don't think that's gonna happen here. I agree with, the comment that, I think right now, the lot coverage and open space requirements and setbacks, I think I would never encourage a bigger footprint than what is currently allowed, because, under the current rules, you can make a beast of a house. And so I think this needs to be studied. I hope somebody like you or others can enlighten me as to how a community with privately owned properties, and people have different ideas about what they want and they don't want, as opposed to being in a community with deed restrictions. How do we create better architecture? And, I have some ideas for that, but this game of, letting somebody go to the front of the line because they're doing a house addition instead of a new house, I think that's totally wrong. Who are we to judge? It could be a really, really bad existing house, and everybody needs to be treated equally, and so I'm sort of offended by this language. This doesn't represent certainly my view of the community and the people that I know, who I think greatly care about Birmingham and moved here for what it is and care about good design and good architecture and whatnot. So it ain't perfect now, there's no question about it, and I'd love to make it better, and would be open for that. But some of this blanket language, I think, is just inappropriate. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Kozak. Not sure there was much for him to respond to
No,
off
they're
on
just-
that,
there's
so just
comments,
comments. So, okay, move along. Just keep going around. Mr. Scher?
A few things. With regard to the chart of parks and the various columns and X's and all that, I wonder if that isn't overstepping the master plan bounds and treading on the toes of the Parks and Recreation Board. I'm in agreement that we ought to be looking at the parks, on a longer-term horizon than just, this year or the next year. But, since the master plan drives what we do, I'm not sure that we've spent much time focusing on the particular columns and X's and whether we're the best person, best group, or not the best group to do that. So I'm kind of more inclined to say that here are issues to consider, and the master plan should require or direct or recommend that the Parks and Rec Board do a more comprehensive, longer-term study and consider, among other things, these issues. With regard to streets, I have two comments. The first is that, I'll say it this way. I grew up, and I've said this before, I grew up in a town where the speed limit was 20 miles an hour, and it didn't work. Nobody drove 20 miles an hour. Maybe less significantly, I read the statute. It says exactly the opposite of what you said it says in here. It clearly allows drivers to drive up to 25 miles an hour in residential zones unless there's a very complicated mechanism that deals with the 50th percentile and the 85th percentile and all these engineering things, studies to change the speed. So I'm all for slowing down traffic, but I don't think that's a good way, and I would not, endorse that in the master plan. With regard to trees, I think we ought to include a recognition that as the climate changes, the trees should not just be native, but should be resistant to the changes that we anticipate. I've seen numbers like you mentioned the pear trees as undesirable species, and that's certainly true. But there are a number of species that don't seem to be dealing well with the changing climate, and just because they're native, I would want to recognize that under the rubric of sustainability, if nothing else. In the neighborhood parking, I see a tension between the desire to have a uniform set of parkings and the comments about allowing the neighbors, various neighborhood districts, to make choices. And I'm concerned that the more we allow different neighborhoods, and particularly depending on how narrowly we define them, is it street by street or is it the planning districts? But the more we allow them autonomy to make choices, the more we are going to run the risk of, over the course of this plan, duplicating the multiple numbers of, parking enforcement zones that we already have. And I wonder, I'm supportive of the notion of reducing the number of parking zones to make enforcement easier, but I wonder about, having that much autonomy for different neighborhoods. Two comments on the housing section. Do we really have a problem with people building to plans that aren't approved? Put another way is, maybe Nick or Jan or somebody can comment whether that's really an issue in this town. I thought that one of the main things the building department did was to confirm that foundations were laid where they were supposed to be laid, and that houses weren't built taller than they weren't, and that side setbacks are respected, and all the rest of that. So if that's true, I'm not sure that the master plan needs to say that. If it is true, then by golly, we sure ought to be saying it. We ought to be saying a bunch of other things, not just a master plan issue. I wonder, I forgot to mention in streets, maybe Matt, you can explain 8-foot sidewalks in mixed-use districts. And if I understood the recommendation, it was 8 feet sidewalks plus the 5 to 6 foot strip with the tree in it. I'm not sure that there's enough room in some of the mixed-use districts to put that in as a standard. Certainly, we saw just recently with, was it the reserve development, that there isn't that kind of room. And I don't know that, I sort of had the impression that we haven't had a problem with sidewalks being less than, being 5 feet, being necessarily too narrow. So that was of concern to me. And then the last comment, I think that the issue of, keeping the housing characteristics is it's a real challenge. And I liked the suggestion that the city look at whether there are other historic districts to create, and that may be an effective way to help preserve the character of those parts of the town that haven't already been largely rebuilt in the last few years. I think that, it's probably more detailed than we can deal with at the master plan stage, but, a lot of the problem seems to be, a lot of concern that people have expressed seems to be height. And it may be that there's some trade-off to be had in terms of lot coverage or something else for first floor size in exchange for reductions of heights and perhaps, even conforming to certain, district by district guidelines. So that's the, kind of my set of comments.
Okay, thank you.
There was a bunch in there. I don't know, Scott, if you want me to address any of that.
If there's something you'd like to comment, please get the conversation going.
Yeah. Well, I think, two items sort of point to what we started listing as say best practices versus, as strict recommended action. And one of these is the mixed use sidewalk question. Towards the end, is it okay at 5 feet plus the planting strip? And obviously, in a lot of places, that's what you have room for. Though it has been a problem in some cases with dining decks where with the decks sort of a little too close, you don't have the room to get around it. In general, what we were doing in that case was saying, here are some best practice recommendations, and this is listed elsewhere as well in the document, where it's pointing out that ideally you'd have more space. That may not be the standard that you're able to adopt, and maybe you think that should be adapted more specifically given the constrained right of ways. But in a broader sense, it's a best practice to have that wider sidewalk. And I just wanted to make one connection to that best practice, which was also in the comment on parks and the checklist, which is intended to illustrate the best practices. And maybe we're not clear about that. The statement that Janelle brought up about community parks was in the section saying, here's some best practices of how you should consider parks when reevaluating, as the Parks Board when reevaluating park amenities going forward into the future.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Mr. Boyle, did you have anything?
Some small points, but I think I'll maybe leave them. The master plan does lots of things, and having this list of parks is actually, I think, a good thing, because if people want to know where the parks are, here's an example of where they can go and look at a master plan. To me, the master plan has several functions, and having information that we can turn to about how many people live here, or what's the direction of the population, or where the parks are, in my opinion, is valuable. So I say we don't throw everything out just because we think it's covered elsewhere. And that leads to my second point. The master plan, however, I think should also be somewhat more directive. By that I mean, we have 20 master plan actions in this chapter. Are they all equally important? Are they all going in the direction that we want? And should they all be dealt with in the same time frame? These are questions that I think we should be addressing. So let's talk about this subject. It's retain neighborhood quality. Everyone would agree that we have wonderful neighborhoods. However, not all of us would agree that everything about the neighborhoods is good. And I live in a neighborhood that has great tree cover, wonderful homes, but they have appalling streets. They are falling apart. That, to me, is where we need to be a little bit more directive. We need to say somewhere, it may not be here, it may be in a general statement, but it needs to say, to keep our high-quality neighborhoods, we should take the recommendations of the Improvement Committee and drive forward with them. And we should do this by a certain time. We have the opportunity in this plan to push the people who sit here on Monday nights. And this plan, in my opinion, the 20 action statements in this chapter, which we've all read, it's obvious that we've all spent some time reading it, listening to these really good comments. So I read mine and I said to myself, well, yes, all very good, but what do we want to work on? What do we want to do? What's important in this particular case? And I think we have got some, not all, but some dreadful road conditions in this very well developed and very well planned town. We need to be more directive in where we put our time, effort, and also money. And if I can make a side comment on whether you restore or whether you rebuild or build from scratch, the most important driver is going to be the level at which you tax the addition into your house. That's what's going to make the difference. And why can't we address that? Why can't we say to the city, maybe we need to change the taxing arrangements in order to stop people building giant houses in some parts of the city? It's simple. Not simple, but we can say it. And then there's other small points. Just one small one that bugs the hell out of me. I'd never heard of the wells, by the way. The Derby well, this is a new term to me, so I looked it up on Matt's wonderful plan. It's in the wrong place, Matt. Sorry. But the well is actually directly across the railway from Derby School. The number 2 you've got is right down at Pembroke Park.
Yeah, that may be because I had readjusted those numbers like 6 times.
I can believe you. But anyway, if you just bump it up the railway a bit, it's right there.
Mr. Jeffries.
Okay, I've got a couple here. So when I looked at the park thing, and I agree, I think the park thing should be in there because I participated a little bit in the park thing, and it had a scope to it that isn't quite as broad and intertwined with other things in the community as this is. So I think it's in there. I don't think you throw that out. I think you use it and then say, you know, where does our little piece of this? So 2 things when I looked at this that struck to me. One is we've got all this demographic stuff talking about the age of our community and where the age of the community is going. And the thing that our parks, to me, don't have is we don't really have facilities for seniors. We have 0 ball diamonds for senior softball. We have teams, but we don't have anything that's that. Pickleball, where I guess we're taking care of or getting better at, though it doesn't look like it's going to be a huge number, but at least that's being worked on. Other things, I just to have kind of that mindset, shuffleboard. I mean, like in Traverse City, you can't even get on a shuffleboard court. And I know it's kind of stereotypical old thing, but I mean, have we thought about this stuff? What are the things that we might want to put in the parks that help, you know, with an aging population? The second thing is we kind of have this like binary thing. Is either maybe the park needs a cafe or maybe it doesn't. I think there's other stuff in there. And to me, I think about, you know, this pop-up thing. So what if you had a facility, which wouldn't have to be, maybe it's a concrete pad, maybe it's a water hookup, maybe it's an electrical outlet, you know, with a GFCI on it, to have in some of the bigger parks, Crestview, Barnum, Poppleton maybe, where there could be a pop-up thing for maybe the summer months when you have tons of people out there for soccer or whatever. So I just think maybe we could think a little bit, in between the things that we've got here. The school facilities thing, so just, we do have a park, Adams Park, I believe, where we do coordinate with the school, a private school in this case, and so they use the park and we use the park, and so I don't know if that model, or there's a model that isn't finalized at all, but there's a direction being taken with our existing senior facility, which is in a school building, where the community will partner with the school and we'll be able to fix up the facility and have an actual lease agreement and have something a little more formalized so that we can, make the building more adaptable, because it was an elementary school, which is about as far away from a senior facility as you can get. The other thing, when I look at some of these things, is that our parks, other than the ice rink, are, and we don't have sunny days every day, are very outside kind of things. And so is there an ability to try to make our activity that we offer to the community more year-round? Can you do a tennis bubble that is not a private club, but is for the community for, the 4 months where you can't really get in, you can't really play outside? Or do the same with, some of the pickleball courts or something. So I don't know if it's a direction we want to head, but, we've got communities around us that have some better stuff, and I think it might be worth looking at. So when I looked at the retained quality, keep streets pedestrian oriented, I totally love this stuff. I'd love to do the 20-mile, but I'll trust Dan if he can't do it. I mean, I'd like to do it 20 if you do 20, can you get them to drive 30? It'd be great, right? The thing that it just keeps hitting me in the head, though, is when I think about, again, I'm trying to represent, our senior community here, being involved with that. There's a community that's been the largest growing community for the last 4, 5, 6 years, called the Villages. You get around with a golf cart. My mom moved into a 55 and up community. You get around with a golf cart. All we have is bikes, walking, and cars. And I mean, you can go a long way in this town in 25 mile an hour, and they have city cars and there's different things. So I think it would be awesome and help other people get around perhaps if they, my mom, for example, can't drive a car, but she can use this golf cart. So her mobility is totally tied to that. I think there's probably others in this community too. So I'd love to look at that. Plus, you could get 2 of them in a parking spot. I totally agree with you on Lincoln. I'd love to see a study done. Do you need parking on both sides? If you look at the north and south side of Lincoln, between Southfield and Big Woodward, I think you could probably do it on one side, because the south side of that the north side of that, almost every street is, every house is right there on a corner of another street where they could park. Skip that one. On the tree thing, you got to study it, but I think some of these things we need targets, and that are some stretch goals or something to aim. I agree with Robin's point, but directive. A 5-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 10-year plan, or whatever to fully restore our tree canopy. And it drives me crazy where you'll see somebody, 5 houses in a row, and they decided they're not going to replant a tree. My tree came down, and it was within hours the arborist is there. Here's your, pick your tree, and it was back up. So I don't know how that all works and why we don't have them everywhere, but okay, I'm almost done. Sorry, I did spend a lot of time with this. And I know we're doing land use here, but some of these parks, I don't know how you do this with the mindset, but if you buy a house on a park, I think we've got a mindset here is that you can fully expect that you can tell people that you really don't want them to do anything in the park. You don't want, when I asked why they didn't add another ball diamond at Poppleton, it said the neighbors don't want it. Well, that is, as you pointed out, that's a community park. We all pay for it, not just the houses around that. So why, you move on a park, you should not be surprised if people are doing activities outside. I mean, I don't want them parking in your yard, but, and then, I guess my last comment, I think here is on, no, I got two more. One on parking, I would love to see us coordinate. We talk a lot about neighborhood parking and other stuff, but I think we need to some of these things need to be brought together. So you've got parking in the neighborhoods, but we don't really talk about where are we going to add parking? And maybe that's a coordinated thing that, the Bate Street, which is for some reason not even involved in this huge project that could be, if there was a vision for that, then maybe that solves some of this. And I think that needs to be coordinated. And then my 2 cents worth on the trying to maintain some of the scale in some of these neighborhoods is, I kind of disagree. I think you don't have a ton of room, but to allow somebody who has a ranch or a bungalow to do a little bit more on first floor lot coverage, and then have a separate calculation that the second floor can only be so big. It cannot fill up the whole thing. And maybe, I don't know, I'll make it up. It's 800 feet or whatever. It's 600 feet. I don't know. There's smarter guys over across the hall here that can do this. But to have something where you can get a first floor master, and I've seen some of them in town, there's not a lot, and you take those little bedrooms. So typically the bungalow, you got 2 little bedrooms down, a big one up. What we would need to do is switch that around. We need to say, take those 2 little bedrooms and maybe a little bit more space, and then you can have a proper first floor master, and then upstairs, do 2 bedrooms. That's the magic sauce. And that, if you look at the demographics, is where it's got to be. And so that's all my comments.
Mr. Williams?
Yeah, on the last point that Stuart made, I agree with him 100%.
Thank you. I'll just throw in a few very brief ones before I take it to the public. I'd like to actually take this a little bit back toward master plan level, because we've heard a lot of really good things tonight, but they've been, in my opinion, very detailed. And that's a good thing. But we're also talking about a master plan. And so I'm going to skip a few of the little things that I had come along, because you guys had picked many of them up. But Matt, I'd like to talk a little bit about when we talk about retaining a housing character. You make a comment that Birmingham does not review single-family residential homes for anything other than building permit, correct? I inferred from the comment that perhaps you were not happy with that choice by the city, but I'm not sure. Do you have context from other communities? Do they have a special review process for the aesthetics, if you will, lack of a better term, that wouldn't be a site plan review that this board would see, but because we don't want to do that here. But I mean, is that something we need to look into? Or are there, maybe a better way to put that, are there other communities that do that we should be studying to see if it's a better approach than what we're already doing?
Seaside.
Yeah, but you had a lot of discussion around this because, in part, I think there were some comments around what you do when you have a community with detailed design guidelines versus, a city who has a code that has to be in place to protect health, safety, and welfare. But there are, from the beginning of this work, I think this has been a little bit of a debate, and I remember even in say, the first review meetings joint with the commission at the community house, like forever ago, there was some discussion then about having more restrictive standards around styles, or not having restricted standards around styles, and that was a pretty big debate. And I think maybe some of this is like a vestige of that still being an unresolved
Sure.
item, which was actually the one thing that I said on that third page, like, well, we didn't actually address this issue because it sounds like, it sounded like it's something that hasn't, like, it's a can of worms that we haven't wanted to really dive into, because some people really pride the fact that there's a great variety of styles which are expressed tastefully in many instances in development. We did early on talk though about some things related to more specific standards, like the amount of, say, glazing along the street, and there are some standards that you can regulate under a municipal code, and whether those should be part of it or not, I think had been a question that came up before we even got started on any of the plan work, with a review of, some homes that have no windows along the street, or who have fencing or walls that are perhaps a little too oppressive on the sidewalk. And so there are a series of design-related issues here and there that have come up. They don't seem to be, however, the most common and repeated issues of new housing construction in the community. And so I think that's kind of remained an open question for this group and the commission. Is that something that we want to lay to the side and worry about some of these more pressing dimensional standards, like, are the heights right, are the setbacks right, do these actually match the general character of the area, or do we want to get into some of the issues that you have the ability to regulate in more detail or not?
No, and that's a fair point, and I know you're getting thrown back and forth a little bit throughout this process, different directions given. I guess for the record, all I'll say is that I think there's a big difference between putting in comprehensive design standards that go so far as to be 30 different deed restrictions and calling out certain materials, to what we do with commercial buildings and mixed-use districts all the time, which is where we talk about not only bulk, but fenestration and its appearance to the street and how that impacts land use. But that leads to another kind of question in this high level. As we look at a neighborhood level, do you have any opinions as to whether or not, without even getting into details, whether or not some of our bulk standards are perhaps too generous? I mean, we heard earlier tonight someone say you could build a gargantuan home, I think was the term. I don't even know if I want to go here, but I mean, do you have an opinion that this is something we should be looking at? You want to talk about neighborhood character, you're talking about what we allow to be built, right?
Yeah, and maybe it's not clear enough in what we stated, but the whole point of zoning being reviewed and overhauled in relationship to neighborhoods is to better align those standards with the character of housing that's around them. If you look at the districts today, there's say a predominant type of housing in Pembroke that's different than the predominant type of housing in Crestview, that's different than the predominant type of housing elsewhere. Yet you have some district standards that apply more on a lot size basis than anything else, and that doesn't necessarily reflect the typical character of the area. So we've stated that that a review of zoning should analyze what that character is from a bulk standpoint, at least in these neighborhoods, and try to better match bulk standard for new construction based upon that. And that was in part having surveyed sort of at random properties throughout the city and seen how they, how those properties, historically, and what the standards are in the zoning, how they correlate, and you know, found in general that yes, bulk standards in a lot of places are probably too generous, and that can lead to a lot of the issues that we, you know, hear people have with new construction.
Mr. Chairman, can I just
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'm going to end it.
Just,
and take it to the-
so there was a time when we did change the ordinance to break the box, if you will. We allowed porches to encroach into the front yard, open porches. We allowed bay windows and chimneys and dormers. So that allowed articulation, and we gave it to them. It was above and beyond the normal sort of setbacks. This board actually, I think, created where an eave needed to break the line of between the second floor and I'm going to call it the third floor. So there are games you can play. You can create offsets, you know, require offsets. So there's another round of things that would certainly improve. I mean, I have certain homes in, you know, that we can all kind of look at and say, is that acceptable or not? And I don't think anybody would like it. So there are standards. I mean, you know, I think Seaside has standards, and they had I don't know what they called it, city architect or something, and like you'd go to the planner, you go to the building department, you go to, you know, and they check the boxes. And I know there's a place not far from here called Bloomfield Village that has a board that reviews if you're going to change a window, if you're going to change your brick. And so there are models out there. You know, can it work, and to what extent? We can make improvements for sure.
All right, so I'm going to wrap this up and take it to the public, but Matt, two last things. I guess my point with those questions is that I would like to suggest or request a little bit more specificity in your recommendations when you talk about the city reviewing the neighborhood character, you know, neighborhood by neighborhood, without saying, no, you should, you know, decrease or increase. I think it should be clear that we should be looking at these because there are instances where both situations may arise, if you know what I'm saying. I just want to be clear that we're not simply looking to map what's there now and feel really good about ourselves because these 3 blocks are a little different than these 3 blocks. But you're saying take a comprehensive look that could reduce the building footprint in some areas, depending on how this community feels. And then lastly, I agree with Mr. Boyle that I think priority is the biggest lacking right now. And I don't know if that's coming, you know, in phase 3 or draft 3, if you will. But I think a prioritization of this is definitely needed. And so I would love and hope you would have some input on that moving forward, okay?
Yeah, and that was definitely the goal for the next one, and hopefully to the extent that we can sort of extract some of that prioritization from the comments that you have in this draft, you know, that's also a goal.
Great. And with that, I'd like to throw it open to the public for a public comment. If you're here, please come forward to the microphone. If you're on Zoom, please raise your hand. We have got one person that did raise their hand first, so I'm going to let them go first. Carl Kona, if you could please state your name and residence and provide your input, please.
Thank you. My name is Carl Kona. I live at 439 West Merrill Street. And I had 2 comments. One of them was in regards to the sidewalks. It sounds great, expanding the sidewalks where there's gaps. My point or question is, if there isn't already an unenforced code of the existing sidewalks and the blockage of those, I can't tell how many times you have to go around on the people's grass because it's so overgrown and you can't even go down the sidewalk that is there. So if there's already code there, great. If there isn't, I would suggest, you know, doing something to try and make it more walkable because, you know, a lot of times you have to walk in mucky, you know, watered down grass and so forth. The second comment was in regards to the parking. And in my location, I'm just south of the Baldwin House, across from the community house and the library. So I have the trifecta of everybody wanting to park for free in front of my house and permit parking is the way to do it, if you have it or not. And so my concern is, on the first draft, I commented about the permit suggestions and that we're trying to, condense them down into something more manageable. And believe me, I've spent years talking with Chief Clemens about this when he was on the traffic board and now with the commander. And when I first moved in here 25 plus years ago, there's a 2-hour parking zone, and then a 15-minute parking zone and permit zone all on my street. And so it's definitely confusing. But the problem is the tone of the suggestion of the comments for the permits is very relaxed, or almost to the point of, well, this can solve my other problems of not having sufficient parking by just taking away or reducing the parking permit in the areas that we have now. And the concern is, as you commented about the speed limit, as you say it's 20 and people only go 30. Well, you start saying you have 2-hour parking, and yeah, that means, and I've seen it firsthand across the street, 2-hour parking is really 24-hour parking, because you just go around the chalking times, and it's it's that kind of game that I see people play all the time. And if you look at page 8, where they have the map of the city, and you look around the core part of the downtown area, you have a buffer zone, a block or two, all around that whole area, and that is, between that and I guess Eaton Street, are the two areas that I would say are permit only, restricted 100%, no exceptions. I don't see anywhere where it would be applicable to have a 9 to 5 or 5 to 10 or whatever the time restrictions are. It just confuses people. I have basically demand from 7 in the morning till midnight almost every day, just from the constant things that are happening just within my block of locations that people want to go to. I also have problems where people from other parts of the city with a permit will come and park in front of my house because it's convenient and they have the permit, and then people back away from it because it's confusing. And the whole thing needs to be consolidated. But looking at it and reviewing, I see two areas. Seahome is a school day issue, one issue that can be figured out for that, and then the rest of it is just restricted parking 24/7. And you kind of have to beat people with a 2x4 on these signs, because they come up with any excuse not to follow it. So I guess I would encourage the next draft to lead whatever committee this is, and if there's a way to get on that committee, I'd love to do it, to be more restrictive than more relaxed with these zones. We just has to be one zone of no parking, but it needs to be very restrictive and in your face. No parking, tollway zone. I mean, Royal Oak does a great job of this. And I think it would avoid a lot of confusion and get people from the problems that we have now. And my neighbors and I are all just very scared that this thing is going to get very relaxed, and what little parking we have is just is just going to go away, and that's not what we want. So anything we can do to lead the direction to be more restrictive in those areas rather than less, that would be the goal here.
Appreciate your input. Thank you, sir. We'll come back here. Mr. Reagan, I see you're up at the mic.
Hello.
Happy New Year, sir.
Paul Reagan. And we thought we had parking problems in Barnum. That really sounds severe. What we saw, just to refresh your memory, perhaps you're not familiar with, when Barnum Park was built, we reduced the number of space of parking inside, trying to preserve green space. And the trade-off was to allow for parking around the perimeter. And that parking was for people using the park. But instead, what we see is commercial parking, city employee parking, et cetera, the exact things that Mr. Kona is describing. And yeah, I do believe that permit-only parking could be part of the solution, more uniformity. I agree.
Great.
That being said, First off, I want to just make a comment about the quality of comments that I'm hearing from the members of this board, and I'm delighted to hear that you've wrapped your minds around this like you have. I think you're finally getting it very well. I'd also like to compliment Matt for hanging in there. I don't know if he's being pulled back and forth, as you say. He's being very politic, and let me make the point this way. Mr. Boyle has dialed in on it, priorities. You know, some of the planning concepts here are so foundational that it flows through everything else, and they're probably the primary considerations: streets and sewers, and perhaps parking, but streets and sewers. And another is the elephant in the room: zoning of existing homes. Yes, preserve the character, but if you look at where it all started, kind of the origins of the issues and the problems, it was in the relaxation of the zoning back in the Bigfoot Wars. To produce the current zoning that we have now is producing extremely large houses on 45 by 80 or small lots. What is to say, if we're wrapping our minds around it, that that's where we want to stay with lot coverage? I mean, it's creating the problem. And, you know, the question was tax incentives to preserve existing homes. Well, if you look at the way incentives line up, 10% of our housing stock has evaporated, been demolished in the last 10 years. The character, the sense of place, the sense of style of Birmingham is evaporating before our eyes. And I think we're all upset about it, not really knowing what to do. I do think that there are legal, defensible methods that we can use to encourage first floor living. You know, the expanded use of existing homes, we can preserve them. And I think perhaps something more intensive, both from a legal, taxation, and architectural, as well as sociological. Who's selling their homes for demolition? A home has to be sold before it's demolished. There's a reason that community member moved out of town to somewhere else. We keep saying that this is probably the best place in Michigan, certainly, and maybe the best place in the Midwest to live. Why are they leaving? Why? And what can we do? And the issues are individual, I get that, but we can market segment that, and we can wrap our minds around it and address it. Stabilize the community in the process, which is kind of my big thing. Janelle, I couldn't agree more that we have to address this issue of tear downs, but I think, you know, the home has to be sold first. Why? Let's go back through that and understand that from the beginnings. But I really do think that we could keep people in their homes, not forever, but a lot longer if the home suited the senior person's needs. For example, couldn't it be that these homes have the ADU? Maybe the ADU is on the second floor and there are no rentals. You have to, maybe that's where the remainder of the family lives, and the originator of the family lives on the first floor. There are things that can be done architecturally. I know that there are things that can be done tax-wise. Now, Mr. Marcus has done some thinking about that, and I believe he understands that we're prevented under, I believe it's the Equal Protection Act that restricts some differential treatment. But, you know, this town's got a fair share of attorneys. And, you know, and some
Maybe that's why people are leaving. No, I'm sorry.
some pretty good ones, you know? Well, there you go.
Too many road planners.
Another thing that might be done, I believe, is wells, drainage wells, that the new construction, there's some push and pull here. New construction may be required to put in wells. You know, if we're putting in a huge house that's, of course, the water's draining off, it's going into the sewers, et cetera, you know the rest of the story. Maybe one of the disincentives that can be used is to require new construction to put wells on the property. You know, not, yeah. Just to reiterate, I want to, again, thank Matt. You know, Matt is being very politic here, as he has to be, and I get that. You asked him the question, is the bulk and size allowances of the existing zoning too generous? And after giving you a very lengthy answer, I believe Matt said, yes, I believe is what he said.
To be clear, I think he said yes in some instances, but yes.
And I'm encouraged that others see the elephant in the room so clearly.
Thank you.
With regard to the parks, it's not a priority in my mind, but I'm reminded of Jim Newhart, who was on the planning board many years ago. And Jim took a look at the parks and he said, Paul, you got to understand, these are not individual parks. We need to conceive of this as a park system, not a park or a skating rink or this and that. It's a system, and it should have services associated with it. So to Mr. Boyle's point, you know, is there redundancy between the parks plan and this plan? And is there value in seeing them described more comprehensively? I couldn't agree more that, yes. Yeah, I think that that has been the issue with our parks, is that they're not conceived as a system. You know, yes, each of the individual communities view them as their park and not a city park. That's not all bad, but we could get some economies there. And an associated issue is the seniors. And I'm appreciative that this board is now, you know, yes, I like children too. And they receive a lot of emphasis. I get that. You know, we all need our places for our kids to play. But you're seeing it's nutsy interest in pickleball. What's going on there? Well, I think it's more than just athletics. I think it's the seniors want to find people to socialize with. Seniors are, I'm one of them, extremely social people. It should be part of our planning, more so. And it's not something to be an afterthought. The demographics of our population are aging, clearly aging, and we should be planning for an aging population. That's about it. I could go on, but
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Regan. Further comments? I see one more person who is waiting in line, and then we'll go to someone online here. So please, is that Mr. Bloom?
Hi, David Bloom. Happy New Year and good evening, everyone. I've got a bunch of comments. Could we take a look at page 36 in the packet? It's page 36 in the PDF, so it's the proposed changes. Okay, yeah, that one. Okay, great. Okay, before I get into what I was going to say, there's been some talk about possible variances and what you would do and whether the lot size coverage would allow it. There's a big issue of keeping seniors in their homes, and I'm wondering, Brad Host has a new home and put in a pneumatic elevator in it. They're expensive. If you allow someone to put a variance to put an exterior elevator on their home, if it doesn't take up too much space, they could get up to the second floor of their home, and then they wouldn't have to move. You don't necessarily, if you've got an elevator that you can use, and they're not cheap, but maybe there's some kind of negotiation the city can do with an elevator manufacturer or something like that, or get grant money. So if you can have an elevator in the home and it's relatively easy to put in, you don't need a first floor master. And that might be something to help, an innovative way, out of the box way to keep people in their homes. Okay. A lot of people know I ran for office. Some people know that I put out a video talking about seams. I was specific. I was on the corner of Lincoln and Eaton, and I said, do you want this street rezoned as a seam? I got branded a liar and all kinds of other things by Clinton Baller, and said I was spreading disinformation like maybe 10 times, and he's still not done doing that. If we go to this map here, you've got proposed district seam changes, and you've got the two blue colors for medium and in high. But what's missing is the low intensity, which I think is like maybe in the previous map or in an earlier map. I wasn't clear when I was looking at the master plan, when you were calling something a seam, and having a master plan where you have a theme and you have seams and fabric and it sounds really nice, it's a good way to tell a story. When you start to use the word seams that separate neighborhoods, I think people get concerned. I was one of those people, and I'm concerned about the whole seam idea. It was not clear to me when you had a low-intensity seam if any of the zoning of those properties was changing in terms of, could you have allow for smaller lots? Could lots be split up so you end up with higher density? So that's something I think that if you're going to talk about that and you're going to keep seams in, and I really don't like that idea personally, and there are others that don't, you should really clarify what you mean by low-intensity seam and what would be changing and what
And Mr.
wouldn't.
Bloom, for your benefit, the last two meetings that we had with the public were
Yes.
specifically on future land use and on the neighborhoods.
Okay. And this is about quality. So,
No, but I just wanted to answer your question, because
Okay.
you threw something out there, and I want to make sure that it was a question I wanted answered.
thank you.
Low-intensity seams are not recommended in this plan to change zoning, correct, Matt? It is, they're maintaining the zoning that they have currently, and the low-intensity seams are in places where the city is recognizing that sidewalks, perhaps biking, they're corridors that are a little bit more pedestrian-oriented that we want to encourage because they are connecting between different neighborhoods. So to finally put it to rest, the low-intensity seams is not suggesting any rezoning or changes in development pattern.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Did you have a couple other comments?
Yes. So if you go to the, maybe I can walk over here, to the medium density and the higher density. I know there are, over here, you've got some apartments there now. Yorkshire is back here, and there are lots here that would back up to this. If you're changing some of this, if you're making this a commercial destination or multifamily or something higher, first of all, this is south, that's north. You gotta make sure you're not blocking off people's light, and I don't know how people living on that street would feel about possibly higher density or where that is.
Well, and again, Mr. Bloom, we talked about this for 2 straight months.
Okay,
With the public, asking that very question. We did provide input to Matt related to the corner retail piece, that perhaps it might not be appropriate, given the retail on the other 3 corners of that particular block.
okay.
So I appreciate your input, but I do want you to know, again, that we talked about it for 2 straight months, and that this meeting is about Chapter 3, really about
Quality.
neighborhood quality.
Okay, I don't want to go outside of what we're supposed to be talking about. There are several locations here where there are, I think there's, I don't know if you talked about putting it talks about putting a cafe here or a commercial destination in the park. There's one here on Lincoln, there's one over here on Booth Park, there's one over here, and there's one right here in front of the waterfall.
Okay.
This is one of the most scenic things in Birmingham, when you drive past there. And to put a commercial destination there, and it says cafe, I don't know how you limit it, but it could be a party store or something else, but you'd be blocking off the view of the waterfall. I don't know why anybody would want to do something like that, and people were upset about it when they found out.
Well, and again, Mr.
Talked about this
You
already?
keep going back to issues that were in December and November.
Okay.
When the public was here providing input, and when we went through a lot of discussion about what cafe meant and what it didn't mean, and that the idea of some of these smaller parks just having, as Mr. Jeffries said earlier, a spot for a pop-up, or a spot for somebody to just get a cup of coffee, to sit, between the hours of 8 and 10 or something, to watch their kids on a swing. Maybe that was more in tune, but no one was talking about commercial destinations within a park in the standard of shopping or retail or anything along those lines.
Well, I did see this in the packet, so I assume that it was going to be discussed.
No? And I appreciate your input. I don't want to cut you off, but I
Okay.
also don't want to continue to dive back into things
That's fine.
that we've already kind of
Okay,
really
when
troped.
you talk about Poppleton Park, and one of the pages there showed that as a community park, I know that there has been some intense debate about that, and there were some comments that people that live behind the park tend to think it's theirs. The people that live in that, one of the contentious issues was because that park abuts Woodward, and there was discussion of putting parking spaces in there, there was a fear, and I don't know if it's a founded fear or not, but again, people live there and have that worry, that if you've got parking there, that people late at night would be driving down Woodward, and if they needed a place to relieve themselves, they might park there and then do that in the park, and it would be not something that those people living in the neighborhood would want. So I think when you look at making something a community park or designating it as, and then you start to have parking there, if it's along a major thoroughfare like Woodward, I think it's really important to make sure that the neighborhood is being engaged in and something isn't being changed that they aren't comfortable living with. And with that, I will close my remarks for this evening.
Thank you. I see Cindy Rose with her hand up. Cindy Rose, if you could please join us and give us your name and residence for the record and provide your input, that would be wonderful. I'll make sure she is unmuted as well.
There we go.
There we
Can you
go.
hear me?
Yes, good to see you again.
Hey, this is more of an overview statement and I'm not sure that it is really in the purview of the master plan or if it's just something that I would request that the planning board look at. But I do think that the fabric of some of these neighborhoods is being impacted by our zoning code. I think there have been unintended consequences, and I've talked to Nick, I've talked to Janelle, I've talked to a couple of the planning board members about this, and I think there's some agreement. But things like setbacks and height, and believe me, I was here when the last time we did height in Birmingham, and I understand that nobody wants to open that Pandora's box again, but I do believe that in the greater scheme of things that some of our zoning needs to be reviewed because it is negatively impacting some of these neighborhoods. I would give the example of my own street, which is Clark, and I won't give addresses, but if you just drive down Clark, I think you'll see my point that some of the new construction has negatively impacted the street. It's just simply unintended consequences, codes that are in place that none of us really realized that this building could be allowed. So that's it. I think deeper dive into some of our zoning codes would serve us well in the future.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the public that would care to comment on Chapter 3 tonight? I don't see any other hands going up. I don't see anybody else standing up. So one more time around, so we will bring it back to the board. Thank you very much to the public, and particularly those that came and provided their input. Matt, if we can maybe get you back up here. Is there anything that you were hoping to hear that you didn't hear? Anything that we didn't talk about enough? Talked about too much, I suppose?
There's some good points in here as far as language of some of the things that we had. Obviously, you've brought up, excuse me, looking to the side, I'm looking at my notes.
No, understood.
But there's certainly things that were brought up about prioritization, which are certainly on my mind, and I'm listening for that. So for example, the schools, bringing up our Shepherd, for example, and Adams Park, is sort of part of that story that we meant in the statement about more official partnerships, and I think we can be more clear about that. There was one comment about. I may not have that note. There was a comment about the parking areas related to the planning districts, and that was something in the first draft, and we don't have that in this draft. I just wanted to sort of clarify that item. And on the 20 miles per hour, I had gone back to the statutes, and maybe Jana has another word on the issue. When I reread the statutes, it appeared to be the standard being 25 unless otherwise marked. So I believe that's possible. We can check yet again. I can check with some other people to see what their opinion is on the matter.
Matt, what I would just
I think the big
suggest,
thing
Matt?
is prioritization, as we've said. And what I want to take away from the comments where people are really putting a focus is helping to clarify that prioritization piece. And, maybe that's something that we can review at the end of this first draft review cycle, sort of a draft prioritization before we write the next draft.
I think that's a good idea, Matt. A couple of things. Number one, if you're talking about the 20 miles per hour, I would just suggest you work with Jana and perhaps the city attorney to get an official opinion. I mean, Dan's not getting paid for his opinion, but if you're asking me, do I trust Matt Lambert, Scott Klein, or Dan Scher to read a piece of legislation and tell me what it means, I'm going to trust Dan Scher. So let's check down on that appropriately. And then I just want to reiterate that you did hear a lot of comments related to parking between the neighborhood and commercial districts, mixed-use districts, pardon me, as well as the discussion of zoning and its implications. And we just want to make sure that we're clear enough that while you're not solving the riddle here, that we have a direction that we're going for, to make sure that our analysis is open-ended, or at least open-minded is maybe a better way to put it. All right?
Yep.
All right. Any final comment? Last comment, Mr. Williams.
Yeah, I think I would suggest that we resist the oversimplification of the parking categories.
Right.
And I think there is a distinction between commercial areas, secondly, areas that border on commercial areas, and purely residential areas. And so I think one size doesn't fit all, and two sizes doesn't fit all, and we may need three sizes.
But we don't need 19.
We don't need 19, but we probably need more than two.
Fair enough. All right. Thank you, Matt. Well done. Appreciate it. Thank you again, and we will see you next time. All right. Thanks to everybody on that. Good work. Good work. Let's move along to the second item on the agenda tonight, comprehensive study of outdoor dining. So, Nick, I know that when we talked last, we had thrown together a series of questions that we felt that as a board we needed to hone in on, right?
Yes.
And we asked for a number of different sort of maps and the like, most of which we didn't think realistically you would have an opportunity to do with the holidays anyway, but we wanted to get back together here, to primarily talk about those general questions and start hopefully trying to answer a few of them?
Yeah, that's right. And as you're suggesting, I didn't bring much additional to the
Right.
table, because you did indicate that there are several questions that you all, for lack of a better phrase, just need to answer. So I did provide those questions in the study session number 6 summary. I think there's 7 of them. So I am hoping to at least discuss some of them. I don't necessarily expect answers to all of them, but it would be helpful to maybe check a few off. And then I did a couple of things as you asked. I did start on a map. I'll admit to you here that it could be refined for sure. And it's hard to show all this data on a map, but I did try to show you where there are decks versus where there are different types of outdoor dining establishments. So if you have any comments on that, I can help explain some of that. But also I did comb through a lot of data and try to bring you seating data, because that was something that you asked for that was I had not yet been able to bring. And I thought it was quite interesting too.
Yeah.
So finally, I did pull all the existing standards. I hadn't included that in the past, and I think it's a good idea to start bringing it up. So these are all the existing standards spread across 3 sections, both the downtown overlay district and the VIA activation, as well as the standalone outdoor dining standards. So
Okay.
I am hoping just to maybe kick it off with those questions and
See if some conversation can,
yeah,
Jeffrey,
we can
you have
maybe
a
keep it
comment?
conversational, and if there's any
Yeah,
specific
this was good
questions.
stuff. This is really good stuff, so
Yeah.
I appreciate it because it's so much nicer having facts and figures and stuff like that in front of you because you try to go through it in your mind. I wanted to point out 2 things. I did some math off of your stuff, and so we have talked about the decks in or out for winter outdoor dining. And I had this thought, I had this mental picture of sitting at one of these decks and having a car slush you as it goes by. So I said, I wonder how many places would have some outdoor dining, some or quite a bit, in the winter without the decks, and it's 2/3. 32 out of 48 could have, and which I think is probably more than would even want to offer it. Right. So I became comfortable with that. The other thing I kind of tallied up is activating the VIAs, because I think like Dick O'Dowd's being one that's, the VIA thing, because you're not out on the street, you're not even out on the sidewalk and all, and they can control it. There's 13 places that could possibly, as we go through our VIA plan, some of these VIAs aren't legit yet. They need to be renovated, like the Pierce one. But there's 13 that could have possible out there, so.
so, board, you open to the idea of just starting to talk about some of these questions and seeing where the conversation takes us? See no objections? Janelle?
No. I want to say something first that I was thinking about, maybe just to get it in our heads as an idea. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I feel like we're approaching these questions and how we can modify our current outdoor dining standards to be more inclusive of winter time, right? That's what we're doing. And it seems to me that in some ways we're like trying to put a round square peg in a round hole, because if I were to take away what we currently have and ask myself, what's the ideal outdoor dining scenario for winter time? It's not the things that we've been coming up with so much. And I feel like maybe an approach could be to look at our current outdoor dining standards and have them be applied to a summertime or spring, summer, fall, but then have a separate sort of outdoor dining standards that are specific to winter time. Because I think for this to be successful and for us to really and truly get people wanting to eat outside in the wintertime, we might have to look at it a little bit differently. These suggestions that if we put a windbreak up or something along those lines, that people will want to be there in December, January, February, I think we're going to end up with a whole bunch of empty dining decks that are storing chairs and tables and covered in snow. So I'm afraid if we don't go at this really embracing the idea of what will encourage people to be outside in the winter, and then I think we're not going to succeed so well. I did a little bit of research and saw that Chicago did something pretty cool this summer. They had a winter design challenge contest, and they had over 600 people send in design ideas for what they could do in the wintertime to encourage outdoor dining because of the guidelines that are in place with the pandemic and whatnot. There were some really exciting, innovative ideas that we haven't seen or really thought about. And I don't know, maybe we need to really embrace it and not be afraid of allowing there to be rooftops in the wintertime. Maybe we can start with our decks or our sidewalk spaces that are already approved to have outdoor dining as sort of a platform to begin an idea that they could do something more creative in the winter months. And maybe we don't specify exactly what it is or what we want it to be, but we put some general standards and guidelines in place, and let's see what designers and come up with. I know this is different than what we've talked about along the way, but I just keep coming back to maybe needing a little different approach to make it
So I appreciate
actually
that.
work.
I absolutely appreciate that. My only initial response would be, we had a period where we let designers do what they wanted to do, and it was called 2020. And that's where we got all of the things that all of the commissioners and a bunch of the public didn't like.
That was way crazier, though. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that, for sure. I mean, I do think we need more rules than what happened there. And, things like, plastic tents probably aren't the right way to go. And I don't know what those things are exactly just yet, but we have a really good set of standards in place for the warmer months. They need a little tweaking. Maybe we just need a separate set of standards that apply just for the winter months. And they could be, some of these things were really creative, you guys. I mean, street pods and cozy cabins and heated tables and really interesting ways of pumping heat up and under the existing decks so that it would radiate through the floor of the deck. Things that could take the place of propane heaters and I don't know. I just feel like it would be good to explore some more ideas. And I just wanted to throw it out there.
Mr. Williams?
I think Bert made the comment sometime in 2021 that we should be looking at a consultant to assist us in this endeavor. And I come back to that point. I don't think I have any special qualifications or training to get into the minute details of some of these issues. And maybe there are one or two members of the planning board that are so qualified, but I suspect most of us are not. And so I'm apprehensive about rationally concluding this in any kind of expeditious time frame. I'm concerned, not so much what Janelle says, but I'm concerned that we haven't sufficiently addressed what the public in Birmingham expects and wants. And I'm concerned that we don't really have the technical expertise on the board, or maybe even in the city, to analyze the benefits and detriments of some of these proposals. So I think Bert raised the issue a while ago, and I've thought about it, and I concur with him.
Mr. Jeffries?
I don't know that I think there's a lot of topics where we're not the experts on, probably perhaps most of them. But we did see this one happen with everybody with free reign. And we saw things that people liked, we saw things that people didn't like, we saw things we liked, we saw things we didn't like. These things can be changed. I think we were tasked with trying to come up with something here in the next couple months, and I think I would say let's give it our best shot. We saw good examples. We saw some excellent examples, and I think we try our best. If we go through a winter and we say, gosh, we really were totally off the mark, then I'd be all for it. But I mean, you brought stuff to us from multiple communities and all, and I didn't see anything like, oh my God, these guys are doing something completely different.
Right.
It's variations of, of trying to knock down wind or protect from sun or whatever, with not making it so enclosed that you're gonna all get sick or you've actually just expanded the indoor space. So I guess let's give it the old college try, because I think we could come up with something pretty decent, but I'm not opposed to floating it out there, and if we say, hey, we're just totally off the mark, which I don't think we'll be totally off the mark, but I think we very well could need refinement.
If I could, maybe what I could say is, as a long-term proposition, and maybe getting a consultant is where we would head. If we are under the short-term deadline, I agree with what you're saying, but as a long-term proposition, as things become more innovative, I don't think it's fair that the planning board check every hour of the day on what developments are around the country on things that could improve it.
Well,
And maybe the answer is that we get this done and then we say, let's study it long-term with the assistance of a consultant.
And the one piece too that we're keeping out kind of, that we could add in, is the social district aspect.
Right. Well, and let me go a step further, because I think I tend to think you're absolutely right, Mr. Jeffries, that if we're saying as a community that we want to allow or entertain for an expansion of indoor space outdoors, and let's be honest, that's what it would be, by building fully enclosed structures on the sidewalk or in parking spaces. However cool or innovative, if that's what we say we want to do, 100% with you, we probably need some consulting help. I got a pretty damn clear message that that's not what anybody who assigned us this task wants to do.
Right.
For sure, and that's not what is being expected of us. And two, that I don't know that I'm ready to just open my arms to that concept either. I don't want to do anything just to hit a deadline, but I also think that if we're talking about simply the mechanics of outdoor dining, as you just said, as we do it now, with a few tweaks, and get into the proposition of, hey, are there ways to expand it further because people wanted it to go later in the year? I think that's what we're doing, and I think that's something we're absolutely qualified to be able to do in short order, knowing that if it doesn't work and no one does it and the commission says, hey, we got to rethink this, great, let's get some consultants in here to help us figure out what can and can't work with the energy code, the fire code, and restroom code, and all of that stuff.
I think one problem we may have if we put forth our ideas with our changes with the idea that we may bring someone on later to change it or to tweak it or to we may see people resisting the investment, knowing that what they do may change next year. And so we might not get an accurate representation of who wants to do what if they're afraid to put money into some sort of a structure or whatever that, so I know part of me feels like there's an urgency to get it done. We've been asked, this is going to be on us, and, no time again next year, they're going to be wanting to have this set up, right, before then. But I'm also worried that if we don't get it pretty right the first time, that there'll be a fear of people not following through with it. I don't think that we necessarily need to do these pods that I said, and nor do I think that we should have a competition for designs. I don't. I just wanted to point out that another community did that, and I agree with you, Scott, that we aren't trying to create an extra however many seats to these restaurants just to expand them or whatever. But saying all that, I also sincerely believe if these outdoor spaces aren't completely protected from the elements and they aren't heated, they are not going to be used at least 3 or 4 months out of the year. So.
And I will go a step further. I was the person that, and maybe this helps, maybe it doesn't, but I was one of the few that said, hey, wait a minute, why are we talking about restricting and not allowing these, 12 months a year? And the current draft ordinance we have still restricts it. I think it put November 1st as opposed to the 15th, but what have you, it restricted it. I know I was one of the holdouts. I've done a lot of thinking about that too, particularly in this frigid 2 weeks of January that we've just had.
From Florida.
As I come back from Florida. And I've come to the conclusion that you're right, that January, February, and March really aren't conducive to what we're trying to do unless we go to these other extents.
And
Right.
close.
So-
Protection.
And then you add into that the whole idea of snow and all these other things. So what I am going to propose, perhaps as a compromise, is that there is one dining season that's 12 months long, from April 15th to what I'm going to suggest, December 31st. It's the existing ordinance with these tweaks, decks, what have you. January through the 15th of April, decks all go away. Anything that's put on the sidewalk has to be brought in at night. It's the regular conditions that we have now, but there's not an extra permit process to it. We've given restaurant operators 6 extra weeks. I know I sat outside at least 4 times in December of this year. And if global warming continues, it's going to be about 8 next year. So
Second that motion.
maybe that's a way that we can kind of compromise around this and realize that there are just some dead months, that unless we go to your extent, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and I concur with what you're saying, as it currently exists. If you go back and you look at how and a lot of this is being driven by the bistros. Okay, let's be honest about it. And so if you went back almost 15 years now, as Robin and I did, no one at the time the bistros were proposed ever contemplated that they would be year-round, climate-adjusted, indoor and outdoor facilities. No one thought that. And no one who had a bistro thought that they were entitled to that. And the problem is, because of the pandemic, we allowed that to happen. But it never was contemplated from the very beginning that we would even be discussing igloos or permanent structures or any of that. It was very clear, indoor, outdoor. Outdoor means outdoor, not climate-adjusted outdoor.
Mr. Chairman, to me, the best statistic that we've got from this table is on the left-hand side, written vertically. There's one statistic, and it says Bistro LL, and then the number is 880 seats. I almost rest my case. We got what we wanted, which is a second layer of restaurants that were affordable. By that I mean to the operators. They didn't need to pay $750,000. They were controlled and they accepted the contract.
Yeah.
They accepted the contract, and along the way, we said, by the way, we want you to have seats outside. And we've ended up with 880. I think it's great. Point one. Point two, walk through town tonight as I did. Nobody wants to be sitting outside.
I agree.
And secondly, I mean, it could change tomorrow, but I think we're learning to live with this bug. It's endemic rather than pandemic. And it means that people are cautious, but willing to at least go inside, even at this stage, when we've got more cases in the state of Michigan than we've ever had, ever. But people who want to go out for dinner tonight, Wednesday night on the 12th of January, are in there right now. Right now. So we're not getting driven by the bug. We're being much more thoughtful. And I absolutely agree with Scott. You know, let's go ahead, do what we were asked to do, is tweak, improve our ordinance for outdoor dining. And I think getting the question of the deck and the sidewalk cleared up, good. All good. But let's not try and give us some artificial dining that is not going to work during the cold like it is tonight. So I'm in favor of what you just said. Let's keep moving ahead. And if I can just say to the man over there, the map's great with one exception. The Daxton's on the wrong side of Brown. But apart from that, it's okay. It's a good start.
Was that Daxton, or I thought it was RH that he had already put on there?
No, well, if he did, then he's not got Daxton at all. Because
Jackson doesn't have outdoor seating.
It doesn't?
No.
No.
No,
It's got
so-
the alley. It's got seats in the alley.
No,
When
Just
I walked down
benches.
there-
moving the benches that are supposed to be out on Woodward.
I thought there were,
Into
but
the
I thought there was outdoor seating in that
No.
area with the fancy lights. Oh.
So that is supposed to be RH,
Hey,
because RH is going to have the outdoor rooftop.
Put the rooftop, not.
I
Ah.
agree with you.
Are you
okay.
James
Anyway,
Kirkpatrick? or
that's my
Shane-
point. That is my point.
Are you James Kirkpatrick or Shane Alexander? That's the question.
Mr. Kozik?
So at least I feel far more comfortable. I felt so much pressure that we felt pressure that we had to allow these things to run 66 days a year. So I'm comfortable with where it's going. And I think we could try to clean some things up and winterize them to some extent, whatever that is. A little more architecture than what they may have currently had, and see where they go. So, I just upon all these photographs you put in here, they're beautiful. Every single one of these, I go, fantastic. But show us the ones that aren't so nice. And I looked at like our bus shelters. They're beautiful. Somebody thought them out, and where do they go? And they're there throughout the year. So I'm fine with moving this along and see where it goes.
You okay with how we're headed?
I like it a lot.
Good. So I think we just answered the second question, kind of, didn't we?
Yeah, we're not going to.
So let me, can I make sure I'm
Go for it.
straight on this? So before I say I agree. So we would let somebody who wants to do it have it. We may do a little bit to help facilitate it, but we're not going to force it. So maybe you can have a little bit of windbreak, but we're not doing any enclosures or anything
Right.
close to it.
Just the windbreaks and the
Yeah.
stuff we've already talked
I
about.
would really like, in particular for doing this, I'd like to get rid of the decks because 880 seats, so you lose a couple hundred in the dead of winter.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we just said,
Right.
January through April 15th.
I wouldn't go to April 15th because as a guy who water skis, I can't tell you how many first week of Aprils and last week of Marches. So at least.
April 1st?
Yeah, maybe April 1st. But yeah, I've had my dock in Upper Michigan on April 3rd. I mean, on Lake Michigan. So,
Yeah.
there's the things, but that's
Ski
fine.
out to your dock?
So to make it easier, we'll say
Yeah.
April 1st to December 31st.
Yes.
Open standards like we have, generally like we have now,
So it's
with the
3 months,
windbreak, et
yeah.
cetera.
Windbreak.
3 months, everything, all the decks out of the way, and any furniture that's in the sidewalk that has to be approved, has to be brought in every night.
Right.
Yeah.
Or say not allowed January, March, April.
Or,
March.
Yeah, and I think what we'll do
March,
is,
yeah.
we've all said, we've all eaten outside when it's cold. It's not a huge demand unless you have one of those freak days. But we'll have enough out there that the guys who can do it well will probably do it, and the guys who can't, screw it, it's not worth it.
pretty clear, Nick?
Yep.
I think there's another virtue to that, which is that we'll get some feedback, both from citizens and from restaurateurs, of what the period from November 15th to December 31st is like.
Yeah.
And if there's demand and there's solutions, we'll hear about it.
Yeah. Fair point. Fair point.
Okay.
Okay.
I do want to clarify one thing, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
On that comment. So you're suggesting that April 1 to December 31, that's when you're allowing everything?
Everything.
January, April, or February, March, you're only allowing street sidewalk or other via?
Just
or
no
maybe not
decks.
vias.
Nothing.
It's basically, well,
But you
I
gotta
think,
bring it in
I
every
thought
night.
nothing.
well, right now, we allow outdoor dining on sidewalks
Not platform.
No platform.
with no platforms.
So all you're
What
saying
we
is no
currently allow.
platforms.
But you gotta
year-round.
pull it
There's a
in.
season-
No
That's what we're
platforms,
saying.
and you gotta
January,
pull
March,
it
You
in.
can still do that,
I
but
like
you
that.
gotta pull it in, but it's only on sidewalks with vias.
Platforms are gone on December 31st.
Right.
Okay, good.
I'd like to think about, again, what those enclosures look like then, because there's
What
some.
enclosures?
some-
What
Well, there's something, right? If it's on the sidewalk, you're allowed to have
A windbreak.
a windbreak
Well,
up to.
we have to talk
42
about
inches.
that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be what the
52
ordinance requires for sidewalk dining as well.
And it has to come in every night.
But during those months, it would have to
During
come
those
in,
months.
which means no one's gonna do it.
It's not going to get too.
Does all of the stuff come here before it gets built
The
for
original one
approval?
does, and then you just renew it every year,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
For the most part. I would say that in the past, there have been very small outdoor dining, usually at non-liquor licensed establishments.
Yeah.
That probably haven't. But for the most part, large or
Comes here.
complicated outdoor dining setups always come here. Talking like, like Seven Greens that has 3 tables out front. I'm not sure if that came here.
Okay.
Could, I don't want to do that. I'm just wondering what that looks like when you, that's all right, I don't want to take the time.
Did you have a
Okay.
question, Nick? Oh, no, you got it?
Yep, he's got it.
Giselle?
It's a wrap.
I just think there's a couple other things in the, Brian's like, a couple other things in the outdoor dining standards that we might want to talk about as long as we're still doing this. And one of the things is, well, there's a couple things. There's some inconsistencies throughout the ordinance about how much unobstructed space should be there, 5 or 6 feet. It's in different places, different numbers. So
Okay.
I don't know if it's 5 or 6 feet, but it should probably just be 1. And then, I know we've talked about this in the past, it's if on sidewalk and deck should both be allowed.
Yeah.
Right? So back at 3.04 C10H, there's a sentence that says, if there is not sufficient space to permit such dining on the sidewalk adjacent to a bistro, the elevated platform may be erected in the street. So it kind of sounds like
Not supposed to have.
one or the other. To me, guess you guys would know better, and so somehow it got away from us, I think, and we started allowing both. So, I just wanted
There's
to,
a third issue too, and that
Not
is
necessarily bad, though.
the separation of the tables on the sidewalk by the common area in between.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what
Yeah.
she's getting for.
I-
But I
I'm
guess
not
you're right, though.
saying-
Not the
It doesn't
deck,
have to be.
not the deck. I'm just talking where you have
Oh, you have
Very wide sidewalk, and you got,
pedestrian space, sidewalk, dining.
You're running a gauntlet when you walk the sidewalk.
And I haven't even decided if I personally like it one way or the other,
Right,
you know? Like,
right.
I'm not coming at this with an opinion, more so as I'm just reading what we
That's a great point.
have already established.
those 3 points.
So Nick, you had something in response, or did you want to answer a question?
I've kind of been thinking about it as we're talking, but, because, just to be clear, she read a section that applies only to bistros in the overlay. And there is a section in 4.44 that just straight up allows outdoor dining decks. And of course, where there's a conflict, the overlay would overrule the underlying. So that's just a conflict I wanted to clear up too.
Unless it's
More
too,
about-
Is there a way to make it cleaner and easier without?
Yes.
Oh, sure, where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yeah, there's always a way.
So I have one more thing.
Please.
I really have been working on this a lot. In our current dining standards, point number 7 talks about outdoor dining permitted to extend in front of the properties. And since we're cleaning this all up, one of the things in here is that only if the property on the first floor is vacant. And I don't understand why that even needs to be in there. If,
You're talking about if it extends beyond the property.
Beyond the,
yeah,
yeah.
but we get a little bit more picky
don't
and
allow
say if it's vacant. But I just feel like if we're gonna clean this up, like, why would it matter if it
Questions
were
we have
vacant
here,
or
do we
not?
want to allow it at all, or do we want to allow it?
No, it's gotta be the same, because
I think
what's
it's
vacant
appropriate.
today is gonna be filled tomorrow.
Yeah, but if a property owner says, hey, I'd like to have tables, I'm fine with having tables, and you're adjacent, it might allow some guys to have it only on the sidewalk and not do a deck.
Right, well, that's where I was going with this. And then a few weeks back, we talked about how some people might like the draw of people in front of their retail space because it brings interest. I don't know, but
But
we shouldn't say
paying for both
vacant or not,
spots.
I don't
He
believe.
couldn't put tables in front of the nail salon.
Right,
He said, yeah, fine, do it.
but it
So
wasn't
you
vacant.
two are
So-
saying strike the vacant and
I
make
am.
it just they need approval of the adjacent property
Adjacent
owner.
property owner.
Yes.
Right.
What you're saying.
Why not? Yeah. And
So-
then it,
well.
What?
and us.
from us.
Well, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
There
But then it
shouldn't-
might
there shouldn't
encourage
be
some
a
more
distinction
sidewalk.
between vacant and non-vacant.
Unless,
That's what we're saying.
yeah.
Are we okay with it extending then, the rest of the board?
Sure.
I mean, unintended consequences. If it's a bistro, they're limited with the number of seats they can have already, right?
Right.
I'd rather have that.
But,
So
but it may
Right.
be
Yeah, right.
preferable to have that instead of a deck, you're right.
What if they're a C? What if they're a Class C and there's no restriction on the number of outdoor dining seats? I'm just
Still
thinking
gotta
out
get the adjacent
unintended
property
consequences.
For the 5 feet, but, I don't know.
You still gotta, I don't think that's
Still
an issue.
controlling it.
We're still controlling it,
Now,
right?
now,
And they're still controlled by the
us.
number of restrooms.
Yeah, it
Right?
was all coming here.
Okay.
now with this,
Comes here,
if somebody,
correct?
if somebody didn't have,
The outdoor dining for a Class C
They
restaurant?
would.
Yeah.
Still comes here.
And Bruce is
Adjacent?
enforcing restroom capacity requirements on outdoor seating.
I think that makes it easy.
I think it
Good
makes
points, Jim.
Okay.
so we talked about the ability to expand the sidewalk dining into your neighbor's space, if we allow it and they allow it. But if you had a deck, because you couldn't do the sidewalk dining, would you be able to expand your deck into your neighbors with their approval and our approval?
Nah.
No.
Not a deck.
Not a deck, yeah.
No.
Well,
let's just
It's a very good question.
And I think we
That's
need
a
to
good
make
question.
these,
It's a great question.
it has to run, the approval has to run consistent with the dining season, so that it doesn't, it's not into perpetuity. Every year you
Well, it
need
has
to
to be
get that.
renewed every
Yeah.
year.
Right.
Okay, I just have one more. Public versus private.
Yep.
I feel like, and I think they should be treated the same, because I don't think anyone, person, public out there has any idea what is public or what is private. It seems to me that we would see these spaces and not know the difference. Well, this is this way because this is a public space. This is this way because it's a private. We sort of look at them all as outdoor dining
How about
under a
bringing
big
chairs
umbrella.
in?
I mean, I guess we're talking about, are we not really just talking about Adachi and what used to be Cafe
Cafe
Villa, that I
Villa.
can't think of the name right
Pico
now?
Dowd.
Social?
Pernod.
Hanoi.
Private, Pernod,
Townsend, doesn't Townsend have theirs on
Yeah.
private property?
right.
220.
Yeah.
So,
So Bistro Joe's, I mean,
But I think
Do we
that,
care?
see, I don't think they should have to bring take their furniture from their property
Oh, you're
inside
right.
of their.
I agree with you on that. You're right.
Well,
I would
isn't,
also-
no, isn't it really a question of, is it on the street or is it in a via or the back? Because it seems to me that we want the stuff off the street. So if you were trying to think of who it is, Bella Piatti's on Townsend.
Yeah.
That seems to me that ought to come off the street at night.
Yeah.
Whereas if Cafe Via or Pernod, they're back in that via, if that's their private property, I don't know that I care.
Right.
I agree.
And even with the Dachi, I mean, if they've got seating up
Yeah.
front on their property, let them be. In fact, maybe even let them be a little more creative with sunshades or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's good. I like that.
And could we continue to just have in our conversation the idea, which maybe gets to what Janelle's talking about, is that if we were to recommend to the commission some social district that has a time limit, it would suggest that we're still exploring the opportunities for some form of outdoor eating, drinking activity that.
You're talking about the Northville concept?
Yeah, just to have it, not to kill it, but to
Yes.
keep it alive.
Yes.
To see if we can make it work. Perhaps, I'm thinking down by the river at the back of the, where the market is on a Sunday morning, do that on a Saturday afternoon, or do it in the park or something like that.
You combine it with Stewart's Shuffleboard Court.
So I got a little lost. I apologize. Are you suggesting we actually recommend one, or?
Well, we
Discuss it.
discuss it in the possibility that we can send this forward as part of our recommendations for going forward, that the city commission consider the way in which social districts could be incorporated, interestingly, into Burma.
How about consider a further study?
Or consider further study.
Something along those lines?
Yeah.
All I'm saying is don't kill it.
Yeah, no, okay.
Well, make sure they know that we haven't,
We're not saying no. We just don't have
thought
the
about it
info,
and
right.
not done it. We haven't thought about it, have talked about it.
I never got to Northville. What's that look like? Is it like the art fair here where everybody gets 400 square feet and it's the same thing and it's.
Well, the way I
different-
went twice, and the way I saw it was they had a clearly defined part of the junction of Main and wherever the street was, and restaurants, dealers there could come out onto the street
Yeah,
in a very temporary manner
in front of their facility.
and bring their menus out and serve folks out there on the street, and there was no traffic between, and I'm inventing this, Thursday 6 till 9, Friday 6 till 10, Saturday 4 till 10.
So was it covered? Was it?
No.
Oh, was it? If it's
Oh,
just
no,
those
no,
Block
no.
the street off and everyone's allowed
Just
to walk
eating
around.
in the street.
Eating and drinking and having a good time in the summer, in the street,
block party.
without cars.
Right.
Not the cars.
Yeah.
Going through the slush.
By the way, so if anybody's been to South Beach, right down on the water, the craziest, they closed that. It's been closed for a while. There's hotels there, so people have to go and you gotta go, and it's working.
At Ocean Boulevard?
Ocean Boulevard is closed for
I want to make sure you
several
guys are not excluded. Do you have any comments or thoughts?
I just wanted to
Yeah.
add on, the streets in Northville, it's at the intersection of Main and Northville. My office was right there during the entire pandemic, right at that intersection. And it's great. Those streets are closed 24/7.
Oh, 24/7.
No cars, and I think still to this day, I've since moved my office, but no cars ever. And the only thing that they had to figure out was with the fire department, how are they gonna get?
Right.
You ever get your car back?
And the residents love it because Main and Center was a lot of cars.
Right.
Especially during PM rush hour, PM peak hour. It was a freeway up and down downtown Northville, and now nobody drives that way because the roads are still closed.
I didn't know that. So there you go. I've learned something tonight. Thanks.
And just to add one more thing, we do have a little experience with some of these ideas because I just saw 2 weekends ago maybe, the BSD set up some kind of a coffee shop on the corner of Maple and Woodward. And it was just a sort of a little pop-up with a little half-covering tent type thing, and they were brewing, they had to bring
Chestnuts.
coffee there
They do
and
chestnuts too.
chestnuts. And so we can do this. Like this can work.
Okay.
We're
So
doing
we
it.
brought that,
We're doing
Robin,
it.
I think that's good to maybe think about that as a component.
Well, a long-term component,
Long-term, meaning, yeah.
meaning
as-
that I have no idea
That's part
what
of the recommendations that,
we further study.
Further study,
Okay.
yes.
Down with that.
Yep.
Nick, we've been bouncing around, and that's good, because it's been good conversation. Back to your questions here, cognizant of time and all. I think we talked about number 2, where should there be off-season and on-season dates? What do we do with furniture? I think we answered that one, right?
Yep.
We talked about outdoor dining being permitted beyond the storefront of the establishment.
Yeah. Yep.
We talked about outdoor dining in public spaces versus private spaces, right? I think from the standpoint of at least a draft ordinance, we're getting there, right, on those, right? Whether establishments with liquor licenses and without liquor licenses should be handled differently. I mean, your maps, you didn't have a whole lot of non-liquor outdoor dining, did you?
No, there's not,
Hyde Park.
Seven Greens.
which is green for the folks who can't.
Why-
read.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it looks like.
6, yeah.
I don't see why we treat them differently.
I don't either.
I don't either.
I can't come up with a reason.
Okay, fine by me.
Okay.
Is anybody grandfathered
Yeah.
based on what they did previously, or what's, I'm just thinking of the Maury or something, and I don't remember, they have it sort of,
Don't you have to apply for that every
You have to get it
year?
renewed every year.
Yeah.
Well, and
The only thing
nobody's,
that's grandfathered is maybe the structure itself.
nobody has any rights to December, January, February, March right now anyway,
Yeah, fair enough.
Outdoors.
outdoors, yeah.
So the questions we haven't really touched on, outdoor dining on both the sidewalk and a deck, that question. There's still some questions here, right?
I think there are.
Type of coverings and equipment that should be allowed, and then basically, do we get into the material standards, et cetera? And then, the potential of, do we want to limit the number of decks on a particular block?
Can we go back?
Go for
Coverings and equipment are already in our ordinance, correct?
Tables and chairs.
Yeah.
outdoor.
Tables and chairs,
And
but not
umbrellas.
like heating elements or.
No, not heating, but umbrella covers, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the extent of umbrellas is it just says it can't block view into retail
We
spaces.
can't have letters on it.
That's true.
And I think that's really it. It's just up to you if you want to.
So
Say
types
more.
of coverings and equipment,
But there's been talk of awnings, there's been talk
Awnings,
of
windbreak-
sunshades,
windbreak,
I mean, all these other
awnings,
things.
heaters.
Right,
Okay, well, we can do that one relatively
right.
easily, I think.
Planters, what have you.
Yep.
Service
Sorry, I
stations.
interrupted you. You said there was another one, and what was the next one?
Well, I mean, I think you're on that topic. I mean, is there anyone that wants to get into that? I mean, we talked about umbrellas. We never really got to the awning conversation because of fire code against the building, but do we want to talk about awnings on decks? I mean, we never really got there. You know, Janelle talked about sun shields, sails, but I think that might be better suited for private than public space, but.
Whatever
I'd
finish
give a little
yours,
bit more
we start.
thought, frankly.
Yeah, the easier one, I think, is the deck thing. Here's a straw man. What if you can make a percentage, 75% or whatever, you're entitled to outdoor without doing a deck, no deck. So, I mean, if you're only gonna do a whole deck for, you're entitled to 8 more seats, we're not gonna take the trip. But if you're truly, disadvantaged in your spot where you can only have a couple tables, then, okay, then maybe we do it. And, the one that comes to mind is Toast, which had quite a bit of outdoor seating, and then they've got a double spot, so you know, that's one that has just a ton. So I don't know what the percentage is, but something that's, you know,
I don't know if you could quantify it. I think you almost have to look at the condition and make a judgment accordingly.
case by case.
Yeah.
But it does go back to what the ordinance says, what you brought up, is that the ordinance technically telling us that it's one or the other. How do we make that judgment?
On a case by case.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you get it automatically though, Bert. I'm saying don't even ask if you can get 75% up here. What I think, if Janelle's reading this right, then I think that part of the ordinance should be changed.
Clarified.
Here it is in highlighter if you're interested.
Yeah, no,
Because we've done it.
What's the, you were allowed how much outside? Half of your inside?
Bistros are the only one, and it's 65 maximum.
Oh, so the same.
The number.
Yeah. That was adopted pretty recently. Before it was uncapped.
It's 65 outside and 65 inside.
That's right.
Yeah.
Maximums.
But I got that wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta do.
What does townhouse have? I'm just curious.
I think 74,
Okay.
and they're one of the ones that were in before we capped it.
How about toast?
I think they're around 50 or
Yeah, it's hard to get.
55.
Tell
I
us.
think they have 40 on the deck and 19 on the sidewalk, is what I'm recalling.
Yeah, correct. 19 and 40.
Yeah, that's a pretty good recall. How about that?
That's really
No,
impressive.
you're
Anybody want to know
young.
the Powerball numbers?
We
or-
removed that one round table.
Yeah.
Scott did, I remember.
So Dachi has the most outside?
Showed his authority.
Yeah, Daci's a little over at 67. There's only a few that go over.
Table
My
out
one victory. Janelle?
So, like material standards, right? And I mean, I kind of think, I don't know how far we have to dig into that because
Right.
what we have been doing is working. And, I mean, we have a couple different creative things. We have those butterfly umbrellas on some of the decks. We have other types of umbrellas. I mean, none of it, I think, pre-pandemic outdoor dining there wasn't anything objectionable about any of what was there, I don't think. So I don't know how far we really need to dig into
Fair point.
that. So,
Much, I mean, it's
No, fair
pretty
point.
much here.
and,
But what about against building faces,
so,
the use of awnings?
so I think that we might not be able to do that for, well, the fire code, right? We've been told if it's combustible, it can't be touching without some sort of fire suppression,
Or within 5 feet of the building?
right? And also, you know,
Three?
Three? That's four.
three, you know, in our own ordinance, first floor awnings can have a 2-foot projection, right? And
No, it's,
that's it,
No, it's 4, I think.
right?
It's 2/3 of the sidewalk or 5 feet,
Or 5
whichever's
Oh,
the.
5 foot? Okay, sorry.
In most cases, 5 foot, especially downtown.
So
So is,
if
but
that's not
but
enough,
is the ordinance adequate to prevent the kind of condition, the shed roof with the translucent plastic material that Lux had?
Maybe letting the cat out of the bag here, I don't know if you want me to say this at a public meeting, but for bistros, absolutely. For all else, I would say no.
So I think that's something we might want to address, because again, and not to pick on them in particular, but that part of my desire would be to make sure that the ordinance prevents the visual appropriation of the sidewalk into the establishment.
I agree. I would also say that maybe the two different types of licenses need to have the same general standards.
Yeah.
I mean, the bistros are restricted by size, as well they should be. But the exterior, walking down the street, you're not like, well, that's a C and that's a bistro, therefore
Right.
this should
Just
look
like
different
there's
than-"
storefronts and building materials
Right.
and everything else. Doesn't matter what kind of license you
Right.
have. It's-
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
You were gonna check with the fire marshal to see, because it says you gotta be 5 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, whatever it is, away from the building if it's non-combustible. what if or if it's combustible, what if it's non-combustible? Can you be right up against the building then?
Yeah, and I didn't
but I think you
double
have to
check,
be
that's part of the
suppressed, right?
information I did not bring, but that's what I understand. Let's say if it's a metal awning, he said. Didn't he say that? A metal awning could?
But wasn't it about the use underneath it that caused it to be suppressed?
I think that needs another round of
Ordinance,
analysis.
why
I'll give
is
you
he
an
drawing a
example, though.
distinction between
The
combustible?
Balmoral is a 100,000 square foot mixed-use building. It's fire suppression system. So if you add onto it a combustible material, clearly it needs to be, you have to deal with it with some type of fire suppression system. If you have a 600 square foot dairy mat wants to have outdoor dining and they put an awning and it's combustible and it sticks out 4 feet, you know, their building isn't required to have a fire suppression system based on its use and size and scale and construction materials and all sort of stuff. So it's a little bit more complex than that, so.
That is still on the list.
All right, and
We need to figure it out, because Roast is gonna come back,
Well,
and others,
Yeah.
I mean, like,
we do and we don't, because it's a building code issue. It's like, it's not a design issue. It's like, go do it and
You know, by the way, Market had to put suppression, and I was told it isn't all that big of a deal. It's not that expensive. It's
Depending,
not.
a few thousand is what I'm hearing.
well, I'd love your input on the aesthetic aspect.
And in some ways,
Punch a hole through the front facade.
It surprised me enough because a 3-foot awning on a 5-story building is what purpose does it really serve? It doesn't really create a canopy. You're walking like on Halfland, you know. So it's we shouldn't be encouraging, you know. But in any case, it's a building code issue and
Okay.
black and white, define it, and maybe you give guidance to people that are coming in for permits to say, you know, be aware of, you're gonna need, you know, some type of a system here.
Janelle?
I'm good.
So it kind of seems like the only two things we really haven't at least peeled the onion back a bit on would be allowing dining on both sides of the pedestrian way. And that kind of ties in with, I think, what you just said
Yeah.
about appropriating the space. And then the second one was, is there any reason that we should be looking at limits per block?
So why is the first one, at least my view is, it's, you get one. It's either in the sidewalk, or, you know, to have both. I think you've already talked about the awkwardness.
Yeah.
Whether it's 5 feet or 6 feet, you got your dog and you're walking with your grandchild or wife or girlfriend, you know, it's, you feel like you're going somewhere you shouldn't be, and encourages people to sometimes, it's like, I'm gonna go around and walk the street. So why just?
When you say both on the sidewalk on both sides, or on a deck and against the building?
I'm saying one not contiguous, one zone, whether it's on the sidewalk abutting the building and you walk around it, like we saw most recently at the,
That's civil, that new thing by the.
right, there are 6 tables out there, whatever. Or there's a deck on the outside. I think once you allow both, it's not public space. You're walking through something, so. The toast condition, right? Does anybody think that is is there an appropriate circumstance for that? I don't.
Look at, how about La Strada when they had their deck? It wasn't all that long, but they didn't have any umbrellas or anything like that. When you walked through, it was wide open, and, you know, they only had, I don't know what they have, 12, 14 seats along the building, but they didn't come out very far. I didn't get that impression. I would agree with you that, you know, the toast, it can feel a little bit more enclosed, but, you know, they got railing up along the sidewalk and actually on both sides.
Yeah, but that bothers me. It really feels constricting.
Yeah.
And
Now let's,
then you get wait staff in there,
yeah.
and you've got street trees in there, and it's like, you know.
But it's an urban condition, and I mean.
Yeah, but it's a public street.
Hear me out. I mean, the urban condition is not the same as a pedestrian sidewalk in the neighborhood. where there's an expectation that you have clear and free sidewalks. Providing we stick to the 5-foot minimum,
Yeah.
and that is an unobstructed, clear, well-finished sidewalk at 5 feet. What's wrong with that?
I say nothing.
That's what I'm saying. I'm pushing back on that one.
Yeah. I think to me it goes to what Mr. Scheer said about the intention of the public right-of-way, the intention of the public space, and the fact that maybe it's even perception that once you get down to those sort of parameters, I feel like I'm not supposed to be there. Not implying that I don't mind it being congested. I mean, we want people on our streets. That's the whole point. But how much is too much? I mean, at what point do we just say pedestrians not allowed? You know, and I know I'm taking it way too far, but
What if you go to 6 feet if you have it on both sides?
you know.
I'm not sure. I think it should only be on one side because I have seen some examples, and Lestrada's a really good one that you made where it actually worked out very well. You know, they have a little different condition, right? They have that sort of notch in the building that goes back, and they had some seating there. So my point is maybe this is something we don't say we can't have on both sides, but we have to look at it
Case by case.
and just a little more thoroughly than we have in the past.
You're saying both sides with the approval of the planning board.
Yeah, maybe we just have to do a little better job. Some of these got away from us maybe a little bit, right?
I must say
And,
the toast condition, as I turn the corner and
Yeah,
I'm
that's
walking
pretty
south
rough.
from Maple, I started, it's like, okay, what's going on here?
again.
Do I make eye contact with people or not? Do I walk side by side? How do you, a 5-foot with railing on either side,
Was that?
I mean, there could be people, which happens, they're waiting for a table. And
True.
So I've, sometimes I'll like, all right, I'm going that way to just avoid that condition, so.
yeah, toast isn't good. I think you're right.
I almost
But
wonder, and
Lestrada
we're talking
is.
about both sides, I know you stepped out for a quick sec, but I almost wonder whether or not we need to continue this next time, but just, do we have any idea, real quickly on the maps that you have, what is the actual sidewalk width, not including the furniture zone? And like, I'm wondering, is there anywhere where we could get more than 6 or 7 feet, or are we just chasing something that's impossible? And if we're never gonna get 8 or 10, we gotta think about it in different terms, I mean.
Now, I do get your point. I mean, the one I'm thinking of is Bella Piatti, where they actually have a couple of seats on the building side, and then they had this, gargantuan deck with carpets and hi-fis and, oh my God, and everything. But it was more the structure on the roadside that made me think. And Toast is the same. It's not the people there. It's the fact that you've got all this ironwork and a shed roof at Toast that maybe does create that tunnel effect, like Lux did, and there it was complete. It was awful. But I think the actual idea that you could have people sitting out on a platform and have people against the window and you've got a passageway in between is not necessarily bad.
I'll give you that, but we have to figure out what that condition is that maybe we can agree to,
We
right?
have to do it well.
I mean, I think that's the devil in the detail.
Case by case.
Case by case.
But
We
is
talk
it-
about discretion if Scott.
But is-
When we talk about the
Toast-
5 feet, we're talking about unobstructed, you can take a 5-foot, wheelchair or whatever.
Wait a minute, let me-
But then there's also the other thing of, how about the obstructed stuff that is still like mostly air? So like, I got a tree here, but I got another 2 feet or 3 feet. Well, now, my perception is I can only walk in 5 feet, but I've got 8, there's,
so,
what is the distance from one to the other, whether it's obstructed or not, and what is you gotta have the 5 foot, it's gotta be in there, but maybe you need 8 feet between that table and that table.
is Toast on the sidewalk, are they both on the sidewalk, or is their shed on a platform in the street?
Street.
That's on the platform,
Street,
the
okay.
street.
It overhangs the
diners on the
amenity zone a
side.
little bit as
But
well.
it does overhang
And-
the,
Overhangs the
There's a
sidewalk.
slight overhang.
So maybe maybe one way to look at this is that, you can have a I'm struggling for words here. You can have a side on the public sidewalk and a deck if there's more than 5 feet, but not both. But not both sides on the sidewalk, right? No infringement on the second side of the sidewalk, if that makes sense.
Like a tree.
Well, like an overhang, really,
Something you're doing.
like a tree or, and, something that, the idea being that the sidewalk
It's clean.
is clear.
Clear. Yeah, no,
From curb face to wherever this
yeah,
element
I'm with
is.
you.
I think you might be onto something. I think, again, the devil's in the details of what
Yeah.
it looks like and how wide some of our sidewalks really are.
Caution sign that says your approach.
But, Nick?
So I just wanted to add 3 comments before I forget from my observations. The examples you're using of Toast, Bella Piatti, and I would throw in a deck like Tallulah. These are all platforms that are built up. Some of the newer platforms we're seeing, like Lestrada's did, or Dick O'Dow's, are flush. And I would argue that they feel night and day different.
Good observation.
Same with the Maury that will be coming. That will be a flush platform. So something to consider. Maybe,
point.
maybe not.
Okay.
2, I wanted to at least let you know that there's something going on here at the city, driven by management, that we are trying to contain these outdoor dining patios a lot better, because we've seen the abuse of such with table and chair creep into
Right.
clear paths, expanding this, that, this, there, and the other. So we've been requiring more railings and more barriers. Take the Maury deck. Originally, they did not have a railing on the curbside.
Right.
The city commission required them to put one. So you could argue that might make it feel more enclosed, but it serves another purpose to keep those tables and chairs, server amenities from bleeding onto the public space and using space that they're not, frankly, paying for or signed up for.
Yep.
The third is to answer your question, Mr. Klein, about where we might have more sidewalk. And I would argue that the South Old Woodward reconstruction project has kind of created a wavy pattern, and there are areas. The one I'm thinking of is a prime example, is the one by the Mad Hatter. That's like 15 feet.
Yeah, tennis court.
And now we're having a scenario where there might be 3 food and drink establishments vying for that space. And that's a very interesting space. It's very unique. I don't want to paint it with a
Got
broad brush.
benches, right?
But that's something else that got brought up, is the potential for the sharing of outdoor dining spaces.
Lovely.
To eliminate kind of ad hoc or
Interesting.
ugly, like, piece together things where you have to do a little
Yeah.
snake.
That's a nice idea.
And those big areas that are produced by the South Old Wood reconstruction are
That's a
prime.
Janelle condition. That's, something that's
Those are prime
innovative.
areas for that kind of thing. So we might want to construct an ordinance because, as you see on the map, the majority of outdoor dining are right downtown.
Oh, yeah.
And if we can take advantage of those spaces, now they were built to be public amenity spaces. That's another argument. Do we want to take away those public amenity spaces for outdoor dining or not? But that would be my answer to that, because there is mostly where there's on-street parking, the sidewalk is too thin to have any sort of substantial outdoor dining patio.
Right.
It's those bulbs, those bump
And so
outs.
I'm going to maybe kind of bring the conversation to a close tonight by maybe saying that that's what I think we need to look at. If those areas where the sidewalk is too thin, as you say, maybe it's too thin to have anything against the building. And I guess that's kind of the argument that I think, or the discussion we need to maybe have next time on seeing some pictures and some dimensions and getting a sense of what that looks like.
Okay.
Okay? Good. So Nick, you got a lot of info from us, I think.
Yes,
I think it was coherent.
I think so.
You're in a good spot to come back with some draft language and some other things that maybe we're not even thinking of, and
Yeah. I think that's the best approach, is for me to take another wholesale stab at the ordinance based on what I've heard. I do think it's a good idea to go out there and maybe take some pictures with a measuring tape
Yes.
and tell you exactly what we're working with.
okay.
So I'll try to do that as well.
Hopefully our goal next time would be to look at this draft ordinance and maybe just get into the deep nuts and bolts of the ordinance. And
Yep. change this word for that word, switch this around, add this to subsection 3, things like that. That's what I'm hoping for.
Okay. And that's in the meeting in February.
It would be February 9th, I believe, after the chapters 4 and 5.
So it'd be the same setup as this meeting?
Yep, exactly.
Let me ask a silly question. And it kind of goes to, well, as we close this conversation, I don't think we have any communications. I don't think we have any administrative approvals to discuss, right?
Oh, we do.
Yes, do. I do.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
So I don't know who you want to go first, but I do have one. I think it'd be a quick question.
Okay.
You want me to go?
It's usually the kids.
Let's get it out of the way. So if it runs late, it's their fault, not my fault.
Okay.
So this is
Mine-
one. Sorry?
Mine is a quick question,
Okay, sure.
so I'll
Mr.
go
Blunt,
first.
go ahead.
Do you feel comfortable administratively approving Lux?
As in what you saw in your packet?
Yeah.
Yes, because we
Because
were.
of scale. I'm only talking about scale, I'm not talking details. I'm just saying this is a bistro that is in effect doubling. You know,
We already approved it.
So I think you're.
no,
yeah,
we approved the original bistro.
Yeah.
We approved the expansion as
We
well.
approved the expansion as well.
Approve the expansion.
So this was
You were
just.
out of town.
I must have been out of town.
You were out of town. We did
It's the first time I've seen it.
Okay, okay.
This was
no.
a minor
Okay.
change to the
Definitely not.
approved plan.
No comment.
We noticed a discrepancy from the building plans, and we
Right.
wanted to correct it with
Okay,
the
fair
interior
enough.
seat.
Okay, no, good question.
Yeah, good question. I'm glad you asked.
Stuart?
I just had a comment. The benches, I don't understand how this, I don't like that this happened. The benches from the Daxton are now, instead of being out on the beautiful street where you see people go by, they're in an alley facing a wall that's 7 feet away. Maybe it's gonna be useful, but I don't think that is our intent when we put those benches out on the street.
I'm glad you asked. And this has been quite the situation. When the Daxton went through the site plan approval process, we required them to put benches, bike racks, trash receptacles. That's a tongue twister for me. They proposed the wrong benches and bike racks and trash receptacles. Notice that the black ones, we have a downtown standard, the green. So in an effort to compromise, we, asked them to move those into the VIA. They've since put a trash can out, and we're looking to put city standard benches and bike racks.
There you go.
So we're gonna get more.
That's the goal, yeah. We just, we have some particular folks in certain boards and commissions here that like to make sure that we have matching things, and we have standards for a reason, I guess.
Spent a lot of money on that street.
Yeah. So yes, that's in the works.
All right,
Good.
thanks. Appreciate it.
So you have an administrative approval?
Yes, 191 North Chester. If you're familiar, this is Willits up here, and this is the northwest corner, the back of the property, if you will. I can pull it up on Google.
Office building
This is the,
Yep,
Cerno.
yep.
Oh, okay.
So this is the single-family house over here.
Yeah.
This is the 3 parking spaces that were existing.
Yeah.
Their tenant wants to add a dumpster enclosure here.
Hmm.
If you recall, the grade, it's about 4 feet below grade here, these parking spaces, it's cut into the grade. So they would cut this into the grade as well, so it would be 4 or 5 feet beneath the grade, and they would provide these arborvitae plantings 5-6 foot around it. Ordinarily, if this were downtown, I would think nothing of it, but its proximity to single-family residential caused me to bring it here. And I'm gonna pull up a Google.
Is it in the garage now?
Where is it now?
Does it have,
Yeah, they
How would
proposed
they get to this?
trash in the garage.
Are they required to? I mean,
Are they required to what, I'm sorry?
is it in addition to what we approved already?
They
For
would, I think they would be
trash?
removing what's inside because their prospective tenant felt as though it would not be big enough.
Or they want another indoor spot?
And from what I recall, they wouldn't get one because it's all built out.
That's
Show you.
hard to see.
So this is the space. So they would cut into this grade.
So it's outside.
It's outside.
It's right across from single-family
And the
residential.
neighbor's right
Right
there?
here.
Well, and what's across the street?
Single-family
Single-family.
residential,
No.
historic homes, yeah.
Yeah,
No.
no,
No.
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 So you'd like them to keep it, just to be clear, keep it inside.
Yes.
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 And I just want to make sure that I say it just in case. It would be gates and it would be behind arborvitae up here.
Also be behind a car.
Well, that's where the truck's gonna pick it up and
yeah.
Bang it, yeah.
Could knock the car out of the way.
Now, we had to listen to Brian complain about the dumpsters getting picked up for years before he
Yeah.
moved.
So that, I mean, that's exactly why I brought it, because I thought the
Yeah.
proximity to residential was a little close and a little risky. So I'll suggest to them that if they want this, it'll be a design review at this body. And I'll, of course, relay what you expressed.
Right.
Be a quick one.
Yeah. Just tell them how you heard it.
I got a stamp just for that.
January 26th, Nick, what's on the docket so far?
Big.
I have got, and I think this draft agenda is
That's right,
accurate.
it's back.
To the very end.
I think I include, oh, here
You
it is.
did, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Oh.
Thanks for doing that, by the way.
770, yeah, no, it's helpful
No, I
for
do
both
like
of
that, I
us.
apologize, I forgot to look.
770 South Adams is coming back with the new proposal that you may have heard about.
Yes.
That includes the Citizens Bank portion of that block,
What does?
Oh,
but
It
not,
does?
but not
Not the
the
plant
plant station.
station.
I want the plant station.
Not-
Wouldn't-
still not the
Wouldn't
plant
debate it
station.
without the plant station.
So that's a CIS and PSP, so you'll have that. The Townsend, this is where it gets interesting. New outdoor dining deck on, in front of the Townsend Hotel on Townsend Street. I can tell you that they
Going from
have been
2 lanes
warned.
to no lanes.
Say that again?
I can just tell you that I've explained what we've got going on now to them, and I'll leave it at that. It's, it'd take up 2 parking spaces, it'd be about 24 seats, and it would have a covering like Toast.
They had one before, right? Static,
They had one during the pandemic,
oh, during the pandemic.
and they have one on the sidewalk.
Where is it in relation to Bella?
Right across.
Right.
Well, their deck would have to be a little bit off.
So if this was Bella, it'd probably be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is their valet, it'd be here.
No trucks allowed.
So that'll be fine.
I mean, just out of courtesy to them and expediency for everybody, we need to see both sides of that street. I need to see a full section to know what's happening there,
Okay.
where those other buildings
And
are,
dimensions.
dimensions. I mean, they're supposed to show all this stuff anyway, and we sometimes don't make them.
How the
I
valet
need
is
to
gonna
see
work.
where the valet stand is gonna be, and we need all of this.
Okay.
And frankly, they might even need to talk to Julie about I don't know, there's a lot going on there, man.
Right on. And they may have done this already, but definitely, I'll scrutinize it before, in the coming weeks, and make sure I get you the best plan that I can.
All right.
All right, and what's going on with Canal?
Just a few site changes, I'll call it. A new outdoor dining patio and some streetscape improvements.
Hopefully those
Okay.
plans
And that's
will
it,
be in order.
Mm-hmm.
that's 4 items total, so,
Well, 770 is gonna take a while,
yep.
so
Okay.
we're gonna bring our sleeping bags.
All right.
A quick question about Daxton. So the sidewalk wraps around the building, and then there's nothing, so, now,
You're talking Brown
is it,
Street?
Yeah.
well, so there's a parking lot immediately to the west.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I take that via and say I want to continue to walk,
It dies.
I got to walk through mud for 15, 16 feet. Now, maybe they don't own that property, and maybe that owner likes mud, but,
I'm with Bert. You walk along this beautiful via with lights on the floor and a window into the kitchen. They even have opened that window to sell ice cream. But if you keep
Did they ever
walking,
start doing that?
if you keep walking, you end up at a Jersey barrier and a pile of litter and trash in a
Yeah.
parking lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
We gotta try and finish that.
It would have been nice, just a 5-foot chunk of concrete, but then you're walking across a parking lot, and they don't own that property.
No,
so
I know.
they
I
can't
get it.
enforce that, but. I
Can
don't
you do
know if
anything
that's
about that?
If I'm being honest, I think we've missed our opportunity, but
We
they are a
saw
special
that.
land use permit, at least for the liquor license, so maybe.
All right, any other matters? Wear boots.
Wear boots.
Any other matters before this board?
Roller boots.
Seeing none, meeting adjourned.